Good afternoon, members, and welcome to this afternoon's sit-in of the Education Committee. We'll get the housekeeping out of the way as usual. So I'd advise members that the committee meeting will be recorded and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and online, and I'd advise those in the public gallery that they're welcome to use mobile devices as long as they're in airplane mode and muted, and it's not permitted to take photographs or record any part of the meeting. So look, that takes us to item 1 on the agenda, which is apologies. I have no apologies received, but we have 3 members joining remotely. So we have Michelle, Cara and John. And as usual, for anyone on the meeting remotely, if there's any issues with connection, please just through the clerk and her team make somebody aware of that, and we'll try and get that resolved. So item 2 on the agenda then is chairperson's business. So I think first off, very happy to wish everyone a very happy new year. Hope you all had a good break over Christmas and are back and raring to go. I think we're all up until recently been struggling to remember what day of the week it is, but it is Wednesday, it is 2 p.m. And we're here at Education Committee, so it is great to have everybody back. The only other thing that I have at chairperson's business is just to refer members to page 5 of their packs, which is a record of the informal meeting with representatives from EBSNA and ABSNA. It was a really helpful briefing back at the beginning of December around issues relating to school attendance and some of the challenges that a lot of families are facing in that regard at the moment. So I'm happy if anyone wants to speak to that item. I mean, I noted on Forward Work programme that we do potentially have both D and EA in on attendance related issues later in the year. I think that is an appropriate follow-up. I think the issues raised were really quite serious in that briefing, but unless there's anything else, happy to move on then. Okay, that takes us to item 3 on the agenda, which is declarations of interest. Do any members have any declarations they would like to make? Cara, I can see you're indicating.
Yes, Chair, just to put on record, Charlotte Carson, who's coming in on phones in the second session, she and I are both in the same political party.
Okay, thanks, Cara. That's been noted. And then that's item 5, matters arising. No matters arising this week. So that takes us to item 6, which is draft minutes. So at page 11 of your packs, there are the draft minutes of the Education Committee meeting of the 10th of December. Our members agreed that that's a complete and accurate record of proceedings.
Agreed.
Okay, so item 7 on the agenda then, so that is the first briefing that we have this afternoon, and that's going to be from the Middletown Centre for Autism, if we're able to bring the witnesses through, and that is part of our ongoing inquiry into SEN provision and transformation. So I'll just refer members while the witnesses get seated to the clerk's briefing note at page 20 of your packs, and then the briefing paper from Middletown Autism Centre, pages 22 and 90 of your packs. So just let the witnesses get seated there. I have on my list here attending, we have Stephen Douthart. I hope I've pronounced your surname correctly, but you can correct me if I've got that wrong, the CEO of Middletown. We have Fiona McCaffrey, Head of Research and Development at Middletown Centre for Autism, Jill McCanney, Head of Learning Support and Assessment at Middletown, and Andrew McCracken, Head of Finance and Corporate Services at Middletown Centre for Autism. So you're all very welcome here today, and we're delighted to be able to host you here for this evidence session after you very kindly hosted us at Middletown earlier in the mandate for our concurrent meeting with the Health Committee. So we're looking forward to hearing the evidence that you've got to present to us today in relation to SEN provision and that wider SEN transformation agenda. So really, it's over to you at this stage. We would ask that opening presentation be up to 10 minutes and then we'll move into questions from members and we'll try and keep that to around 5 minutes per inquiry for each member. So again, if both members and witnesses could work with me to help us to keep to those timescales so we can run the meeting to time and give everybody the opportunity to come in. But I think that's me to hand over to yourselves.
I'll start for the Q&As. So, Chair, Deputy Chair, members, thanks very much for the invite here today. We think it's a really important topic and we're glad to see it's top of your agenda at the start of the new year to discuss SEN proposals. At the start of the new year, it's always a time for reflection and optimism, and for parents, schools and SEN system, It's also a time whenever hope matters, but only if it's matched by delivery. That context feels particularly important today because it's now almost a year since the initial delivery actions of the SEN reform were launched last February. Families, schools and practitioners have waited a long time, and they deserve not to just see intent, but also momentum. If I may, I want to start with something very simple. In retail, if someone is employed to stack shelves, there is a legal requirement for manual handling training. Not because it looks good in a policy document, but because it is ethical, efficient and protective. Education is no different. We ask teachers, classroom assistants and school leaders to support increasingly complex needs, including autism, often without consistent evidence-based preparation. And when that happens, people burn out, children struggle, and families lose confidence. And once that confidence has been lost, it's incredibly hard to rebuild. That is not a failure of commitment in the system. That is a failure, in my opinion, of system design. So before I go any further, I think it's important to briefly explain where Middletown sits within the system. As you should or may already know, Middletown Centre for Autism is an all-island organisation established under Good Friday Belfast Agreement. We're publicly funded equally by both Departments of Education in Northern Ireland and Ireland. And in Northern Ireland, we're recognised as a non-departmental public body. We're accountable through a robust governance framework of NI. Under our MSFM, Management Statement and Financial Memorandum, it wouldn't be appropriate for us to comment on departmental policy choices or performance. However, what is appropriate and hope useful to the committee is to give an insight into how reform lands based on our role as a named delivery partner, working with schools and families and professionals. So, within the SEN Reform Delivery Plan, Middletown Centre for Autism has engaged in preparatory work and planning. In the last 24 hours, just before this committee, we've received confirmation of an agreement in principle to proceed with an inclusion symposium, and that will be delivered across school leaders in Northern Ireland through an autism-informed lens and funded through the Transformational Budget Project. In parallel, we've also submitted proposals for structured learning support delivery, and that's formalised pathways for the education system. Both strands focus on building practical classroom capability rather than additional bureaucracy, which we feel is incredibly important. In practice, our role is to help the system move faster and more safely by turning everyday practice into evidence-based capability. So, what's changed in the last year? Well, let's even go back further. What's changed in the last year? Our understanding of autism has changed dramatically. Pedagogy's evolved, evidence has evolved, and practice, thankfully, has also evolved. At Middletown, we are the intersection of that evidence-based practice and practice-based evidence. We test what works, and we scale it, and we roll it out. We know that autism-affirming practice improves outcomes. We know that early support makes improvements before they escalate. And we also know that training helps confidence in terms of staff and the wider system support those children who need it most. The SEN reform agenda reflects most of that learning, and that is welcome. The scrutiny question now is not whether the direction of travel is right, but whether the delivery is strong enough and what is needed to embed it consistently across the system. Northern Ireland now spends over 600 million a year on SEN. Against that backdrop, Middletown Centre for Autism operates on approximately 1.6 million. That's 0.25% of the spend on SEN in Northern Ireland, which comes to Middletown. I'm definitely not making a funding argument today, especially after yesterday's draft multi-year budget. But what I am making is a leverage argument. One about efficiencies in the system with less waste, one about where money goes further to have real results. Middletown feels that whenever capability is missing, pressure doesn't disappear, it just simply reappears through escalation, more assessment demands, school exclusions and family distress. So system-wide investment in workforce capability, early intervention and autism-affirming impact is what's needed to strategically deliver the SEN reform plan. So from our experience then, as a named delivery partner, in our opinion, there'll be three things that will determine if it's successful. That is training. Training cannot be optional. It also can't be disconnected from that lived experience of children and young people and that classroom reality. It must be evidence-informed and ongoing, embedded into how schools operate, just not tokenism. Just as with manual handling, this isn't only efficient and ethical, it's also a responsibility upon us all. And this is a once-in-a-generational chance to make a true difference. The system currently teaches families unintentionally that escalation is the fastest route to support. That's not because families are unreasonable, but because early support is often inconsistent and inaccessible. Reform will only succeed if schools genuinely have the confidence, skills and capacity to meet the needs before the crisis point. There is no shortage of frameworks, policies, you know it. But where delivery partners are meaningfully engaged, consistently and early, that will help reform embed faster and more efficiently. So, Chair, members, a new year brings optimism, but also collective responsibility. The SEN reform agenda gives real hope. From Middletown's perspective, the opportunity now is not to design more policy, but to embed what we already know, what works with scale and discipline. Parents, schools and the workforce do not need more promises, they need confidence this time that reform will deliver. Thank you. Myself and our team are happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Stephen, and I think that's been a really helpful, succinct opening, really, in terms of summarising a lot of the things that we've heard in this SEN inquiry in relation to we are moving into the phase of where delivery is what is key now. I think that we've all heard that good intentions only go so far, and actually if we raise expectations and don't deliver, the consequences of that are really potentially quite serious. So delivery is key, and I think that's a really great starting point from my perspective. It's clear to me from having been out to visit Middletown and when you hosted us that your service is based on expertise. It's based on really robust research and a model that works. And that service you provide, it's a training package, it's a whole school approach. It reaches out to parents. It does so much more than sort of a one-off or tokenistic intervention. You've highlighted the resource challenges. Looking at that service and in a system which is absolutely, as we know today, from the budget announcements and discussions that have been across the media, in those really, really constrained financial times that we exist in and the huge pressures around SEN budgets in particular, how would you propose that we take the good practice from your approach and embed that in the system without necessarily busting the budget? How can we do that in a way that is embedding all the good stuff that you do?
Consistency. Consistency is key across every school, every professional. There is plans, I'm glad to see, in terms of classroom assistance and career pathways. People need to be recognised for their professional expertise. One of the good things in Middletown is we identify pockets of best practice. We host best practice days, so we take what's really already out there in the system and we help share it. And that's something that we want to encourage and do more of, whether that's through digital enhancements and learning platforms or through more face-to-face. There needs to be a variety of mediums. But we have to listen to the teachers, the classroom assistants, the Syncos. They give us the answers. It's all about how we scale and how we do that impact. And I know you're later talking about smartphones. Technology is something that has to be utilised. And we have to be brave, we have to make big choices. So if we were to say we can train every classroom assistant in Northern Ireland, why not? We've already just delivered a programme for 74,000 health and social care professionals, consistent, first-time quality, deliver, unite and the trust together. Why can't we do the same in education? So our services are there, the packages are ready to go. We just need the framework to work with our delivery partners to make it truly happen.
To what extent then, we talk about early intervention all the time when we're on this issue, and it almost becomes quite cliched, it's just early intervention is the answer. To what extent is successful early intervention, in your view, connected to a properly and trained and equipped workforce, both teachers and classroom assistants?
Conscious I don't want to answer everything, so I'll bring in my team as well. But whenever we talk about early intervention, sometimes there's a misconception that it's only at the point of diagnosis. It's whenever a child starts their journey and the parents find out. We say it's the point of need. You don't need a diagnosis. We help based upon the need, not a label. And also think about the transitions of the child. It's not just whenever they're young. Maybe whenever they're in puberty, they're going into big school. What happens at 16 plus? We see early interventions at the point of need, not the point of the life cycle. So there needs to be a change of mindset in the system. That early interventions happens when people put their hand up and go, I need help, because that's a brave step for a lot of parents and also professionals. We need to say, okay, we're here and this is the pathway for you. So having that clarity and that communication channels really key. And I think at the moment there could be further improvements and enhancement. The system's very fragmented. We know we're in a period of change. There's 125 actions in the SEN reform plan. There's over 70 actions in the outcomes-based accountability framework. What 1 to 3 actions will truly make a difference? Consistent training for all classroom assistants, teachers, professional educations, because if we want to truly bring inclusion in to the system and make it mainstream, there has to be equity across the service. So whether that's special schools, whole school, or primary schools, post-primary schools. So I'm not sure if I answered your exact question there, Nick, but...
No, you maybe didn't quite answer the question I asked, but I think your answer was probably more helpful than the question that I asked. I think it is. I think this inquiry is we've been trying to get to money is short, so what are the interventions that really matter? And I think without coming through loud and clear, it's the workforce capability, it's training the workforce to be able to meet need at the point it's identified.
Nick, that's not to say there's excellent pockets of practice out there, but it's consistency. And it's actually creating a pathway to say, here's your time and here's your space to give you that formalised CPD. I think if you just hand over autonomy to the schools and the school leaders, their job's to support our children and young people. They don't have time to go and research the best practice. That's our job. We do that work, and then we'll deliver it to you. So it's about that efficiencies and wasting in the system rather than different school and boards and governors doing it. I'm not sure if there's anything else.
No, I think it's just drawing out that, I know it's an overused phrase, and I'm searching for a new phrase to encapsulate the sort of the capacity building, and that's not to say that we're handing over more work to the staff that are in the schools, but rather when we are in a school, so when we are in working with one young person, it's not just one young person, it's how we can build that out. So that ties in with the early intervention, because the one young person that we've been asked to go in and support is past the stage of early intervention, but the teachers, the classroom assistants that we work with while we're in that school, they will then embed those practices much earlier on throughout, the whole school system. So it is that whole capacity building piece that we do when we're in a school, but we do that through modelling, through mentoring, and through doing the work on the ground. That's
really helpful. I wanted to ask just a question. You mentioned it in your opening remarks, and I think you've alluded to it again in your answers to my first question. The department hasn't yet published a formal sort of inclusive education policy. You mentioned you're going to be running an inclusion symposium. One of the things that has struck me in this inquiry is that even from people who are right in the middle of the system aren't always clear on what the role of a special school is, what the role of a specialist class in a mainstream setting, what the role of mainstream schools are in terms of how we meet the needs of children with SEN. How important do you think it is that we get a clear vision set out of how those parts of the system should interact and what inclusion, when we think about SEN and disability, looks like in our school system?
It's fundamental in terms of joining of the system, because a child that starts off in nursery school, that goes into primary, that goes into post-primary, that may at some stage need to divert to a specialist provision in mainstream education, etc. The system needs cohesion and it needs to be linked up, and the service that supports that child has to remain consistent throughout. So it's incredibly important, but also I think in terms of frameworks for teachers, and I go back to that initial teacher education piece, there is some strong, tough decisions that we do have to wrestle with and get a definite answer on. They've been evaded for too long. And I think we do need some clarity for those teachers, but also to go, create space. There's only so much capacity in the system. We're very good at empowering and bringing people on projects, but sometimes the leaders have to make some tough decisions and go, we tried it, does it work? Then go back and get the feedback from the ground. So the inclusion symposium that we're running is something I would love to see mandatory. I don't have the power to make it mandatory. What we can say is it's here. We've also got an event coming up in the City North, All Island event, where we share best practice of school-based non-attendance, because we know that's very topical, to find out actually what can we do to move it. So by opening up and saying, come to us, we're here to help. We've obviously got capacity issues, but in terms of training sessions, whether that's online or person, please come. Obviously, I think the system needs to think, how do we meaningfully bring that together, inclusion that's a way that's manageable, because there's also education attainments there, personal learning plans for students, there's goals that need to be met.
That's great. Look, I'm going to hand over to the Deputy Chair, and I'll ask members then just to begin to indicate through the clerk for any questions they want to come in with. Deputy Chair.
Thanks for your presentation, Stephen. And you've mentioned consistency now a few times. And when you look at the model that we have for dealing with children with special needs, I mean it's a very fractured type of model. You know, you have special schools, then we have specialist provision, then you have some children in mainstream. How can we bring consistency to that? Because some people would argue one of the fundamental flaws in the system is that there aren't enough special schools, you know, where teachers with specialist skills can go in and work with children who need support. But because of the sort of lack of strategic planning, there's this rush to get children into specialist provision classes and so on. How do we get consistency into that?
There's two ways in terms of modelling and trajectories and numbers that are coming through the system. Do we have a robust enough pipeline to plot up geography in terms of systemically, factually, and numbers to go, where's the child now? They're in nursery school. Where do they move to primary school? And to forward plan that. So that's one line. But the second line is, let's go back to the child at the centre. Where do they feel safe in? Where do they want to be? Where do they thrive? Where does the parents feel comfortable? We're very good at telling people and putting people into boxes, but actually where do they want to be, and do we empower them to go there? So I think in terms of actually giving those children, young people, a voice, not like, we know some of them don't have a voice, but their parents do and their families do, and actually saying, actually, how many kids on our system and parents don't think they're in the right school? So we're very good at data collections, but if we faced some of these tough questions, rather than making assumptions, Pat, of where they need to be, but safe, feeling valued, feeling part of the community. Children with SEN is no different from neurotypical children. Some will want to be at school, others won't want to be at school, but they need a place to thrive and they deserve that. And at the moment, I'm not quite sure that they do.
Fair enough. And in terms of, and you've touched on it there, in terms of teacher training, how can we get consistency into the system if teachers aren't being trained properly?
That's why consistency. So you can do all the mop-ups, top-ups, but it needs to start in terms of a teacher career. If someone picks a career, you get trained, and we talk about the strength of the curriculum. So what is the training needs analysis that the school system has to ensure that every teacher, the minimum standard, so is every teacher trained on dealing with neurodivergent children whenever 1 in 5? If we aren't making that mandatory, is the system truly being set up for success whenever you've got such a neurodivergent? So that starts at that initial teacher education. Then what happens for those teachers that are in the system? They need the space, they need the framework to be actually taken out and protect it. Because as I said there, the understanding of autism continues to evolve. Within the last 10 years, the pedagogy and the experience and what we teach in Middletown today will hopefully have evolved even further. And that's a good point about having us at the cutting edge. So to say what's right now, we need a starting point, but we need to create milestones and gaps. If I may, Pat, just our head of training, Dr. Fiona McCaffrey, is there anything in terms of you would like to add on that?
I think a key point that both the Chair and the Vice Chair have made is that current educational placements can be variable across Northern Ireland. You know, you can have a provision in mainstream and special education, and all of those professionals, both classroom assistants and teachers, and this is acknowledged in the SEN reform plan, have all got different training needs. So we need to understand the unique need of the teacher across different settings and address those needs in a structured way. And one of the things that we're doing at Middletown at the moment is our professional growth partnerships. And we're delivering this programme in partnership with the EA. And that's not just, so it's working with teachers, current teachers, not initial teacher education, and I'll come to that. It's working with teachers who are currently in school, and it's delivering a seminar and then having a series of growth partnership meetings afterwards. So you're not just coming in and doing a training and leaving again. And this idea of a coaching model is actually mentioned in the SEN reform plan. So we're actually working at the moment on some of the issues or some of the strategies that have been identified in the SEN reform plan. So I think building up a coaching relationship with teachers who are currently working across educational placements is really useful, and having that community and bringing people together. And I know the EA work with cluster groups, and we're working with them to really complement their work. And the other thing with initial teacher education is having a consistent thread throughout initial teacher education, where teachers are in teacher training college and then they're newly qualified and then they're established, because people's needs are on a trajectory and teachers will be in different classrooms and different learning environments. So it's having a consistent plan and a consistent framework addressing neurodivergence throughout educational placements. And I think that's something that Middletown could be very supportive of. You know, from visiting Middletown, that we have an award-winning Masters in Autism Studies with the University of Limerick. And we have that experience in developing models of teaching and learning for education professionals.
Could I just ask you, Fiona, I mean, we know there are a shortage of teachers in certain subjects, you know, particularly the STEM subjects, and there's a shortage of teachers in Irish medium as well. Is there a reluctance among young students to go specifically or as a speciality to go into special needs teaching?
I can only speak about the education professionals that we interface with, and we interface with people who are full of enthusiasm and passion for working with children and young people with special educational needs. I think if there were stronger frameworks and stronger CPD opportunities and stronger stakeholder engagement, you might see more of that enthusiasm throughout Northern Ireland. But certainly, as Stephen has said, the practice that we engage with across Northern Ireland, teaching professionals are full of enthusiasm.
Okay. Excellent. And just one final question, Chair. I know your organisation provides support to the Irish medium sector in the south. I'm just wondering, do you provide any support here in the north, and do you have any relationship with organisations like Corleon and Gaelscoileachta?
We absolutely do. Between 2023 and 2025, we worked with Gaeligeas, which I know is based in the Republic of Ireland, to create an Irish language support for teachers working in Irish medium education, and that is used throughout Ireland and Northern Ireland. We work with Carson and Gaelscoileachta. We have provided Irish language seminars for Carson and Gaelscoileachta. We've spoken at their conference, and we're currently working with a child in an Irish medium school.
Our referral process is open to any sector, any school, so we will receive referrals from Irish medium education also. And as Fiona said, we currently...
we have Irish speakers on the team as well.
Okay, thanks.
Deputy Chair David, you've indicated.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thanks for your presentation. Appreciate it. It's good to have you along. Haven't been down previously. You said during your presentation that what's changed in the last year. You said pedagogy as understanding of autism has changed. Just for understanding, is that really the nuances of the kind of training in which you will give your talking about, or is there any of that is fundamental changes that you think would inform the committee in terms of our considerations as part of this inquiry? What has changed in terms of our understanding of autism and indeed how we teach to children that have autism?
I think in terms of the strength of neuroaffirming practice, understanding of lived individuals, autistic adults that were students and their lived experience, and also some of the harm of some of the compliance-based therapies. I think in terms of, especially whenever children experience some verbal communication challenges, sometimes the adults may think they know best rather than actually listening to the child. So in terms of inconsistencies, whether is hand flapping a good thing? Should you tell an autistic child not to hand flap, or should you let them hand flap? Does the teachers have any guidance on that hand flapping? That's how basic we are, and that's why consistency, and that's a fundamental right. And if a child or person wants to hand flap, let them hand flap. That's their way to regulate themselves. They show enjoyment and happiness. So in terms of neuroaffirming behaviours and strength-based approach, there's a much stronger evidence base for that, and that's what we're trying to bring to the fore. Because the uniqueness of Middletown, we have the privilege of working in homes and in schools with individual referrals for 10 months. No other service has that, where you go into the school, you go into the home, and you take them into the community. So we can read all the best practice from all around the world, but we test if it works, and we see the results. And then that's what we can scale with confidence. And that's where we talk about practice-based evidence, not evidence-based practice, because our services continue to evolve given the feedback that we're hearing and seeing from the results on the ground. And again, I'm not sure if either of you would like to comment on that or to add.
No, I think just, to confirm that it's very much the coaching and the training around neuroaffirming practices, but most importantly that our team are out in a classroom modelling those whenever they're working with children and young people. So it's that real life modelling that then we take forward into training.
And I also think in terms of AAC devices, in terms of innovative technologies, staying at the forefront of those to help parents as well. And also how parents learn, going from books to digital devices in the palms of their hands, in terms of you have to meet the learner for their different learning style. And that's what the Inclusion Symposium will have a look at. There's great practices in schools. Currently, it's actually given the uniqueness of what suits the individual child, not which suits the group in that utopian, authoritarian, idealistic view of the past.
Thank you very much. Just then moving on to efficiencies in the system, and heard what you were saying and agree with, it's not teachers' job to go away and research what's best practice throughout the world, let specialists do that and so on. At the same time, and having worked in sort of the health sector for, you've revalidation of doctors, why would you not have some kind of, keeping up to date with best practice within teaching as well? But is that what you're talking about in terms of efficiency of the system, or what's the low hanging fruit? We understand, as everyone said, the budgetary challenges and the politics that probably play out over the next month or two with that. But what is in terms of efficiencies, the low hanging fruit that you see that we could really be tackling first up while looking? We understand there's not enough special schools and some of those big things that will cost an awful lot of money, but challenges we need to meet. But what's that low hanging fruit at the moment that you think we could be dealing with in the here and now?
Structure. I'm going to use that word consistency of teacher CPD, continuous professional development. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. And you want teachers to be enthused, to be engaged, to be self-propelled. One of the things that we do in Middletown is we create online community hubs through Padlets of resources. And it's not just a training session that you go to and it's a once-off. You want to join a community and a family to help each other to ask those questions, that coaching, that mentorship framework. Those are the things that perpetuate and that don't need big, wide system changes or policies. Those are hubs of expertise that we want to get behind. We can't be in every school, but we can go into certain hubs, empower our knowledge and let them cascade it and be there for that sounding board and for that advice. So those are some of the ways without the big system trying to do it. But there has to be that consistency. Here's your reading library. Here's your framework. We know the Google generation. Unfortunately, there's a lot of private businesses out there that trying to profiteer. Whenever teachers and parents are vulnerable, they want the golden bullet. There is no magic wand. It's a life journey, especially in the world of autism and neurodivergence. So those are some of the things that we try and say, look, here's the facts. Here's the reading materials. Go and research, challenge, but by all means, here's the work we've done, the groundwork. And I think some of those efficiencies and the time saving Teachers don't have time to go and research.
Yeah.
We'll do that hard work for them.
Well, I was going to say it's probably one of the challenges in that probably is it. We hear probably I certainly hear from schools going on from Pat's point that they do feel that there needs to be mandatory training because they find it difficult at times to access resource whenever they need substitute teachers and even to fill positions because they feel that people are intimidated by the idea of going into special education because they haven't had that experience. So there is that challenge, but you hear quite often that part of the issue is that they don't feel they've had time necessarily to do the training that they would like to do. Is that something you feel needs to be prioritised?
Just a very brief final comment.
I think in terms of our methodology and our point is support first. So if a teacher needs support with a certain thing, if a child's stimming or headbutting the wall, we could talk about sensory regulation and all the theory in the world, but they need the answer then and there. They need to support the child. And we have to make it accessible. And then if they want to go and join our postdoctoral team of researchers or sit in our panel, by all means, you're absolutely welcome. But yeah, support first.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, David. Michelle, you'd indicated next.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thanks, folks, for the evidence. It's always great to hear from you. I just want to ask quickly, you've obviously talked really about training and how important the training is. So just one wee quick question on that in terms of there has been investment in schools around teacher professional training. Have you seen any increase in demand for your services on the back of that?
Well, I think in partnership with that, Michelle, I mean, there is an increase generally in the number of children and young people who are being diagnosed and who are seeking support. So we certainly do hear from schools at Middletown, and since August 2025 we have provided training to around 7,000 education professionals in Northern Ireland. So we are certainly seeing those needs coming through. I don't know that those requests are necessarily tied to the TPL funds. I can only speak from what comes through our request at Middletown. And certainly around August, around the time that the schools have that bit of time for TPL, we do see a significant increase in requests. And we work on it, we do have an on-request basis where schools can contact us and request training, and that happens quite a lot. And as I've said, I mean, we're trying to move from transmission to just talking at teachers to this idea of building communities. And I think just following on from a point that was made around efficiencies and a point that was made around what are the low-hanging fruit, there is actually building in systems that you just don't go in and deliver a training, but that there is a program that can follow. There is a community that you can become a part of. And Middletown, we have started that process working in partnership with the EA on the professional growth partnerships, and that would be something that we would really seek to develop.
Great.
If I may just come in at the end of that, with regards to the TPL fund, that's a pot of money. We don't charge for our training. That's why we're in such high demand. So in terms of that fund being used for us, that wouldn't be the case. It would be double funded. So they'd be seeking to spend that money elsewhere.
That's just a curiosity point, because obviously that's connected, if you like, the value of training and the fact that the department are investing in that in schools. That's good synergy. But like, I've no doubt you're in high demand anyway. One thing also was, in terms of providing training to the teachers, and obviously that's hugely important, but we're also aware that there's a level of expertise that is needed within schools as well to supplement what the teachers deliver in terms of the child being able to reach the outcomes that they need. Would you agree that some such expertise needs to be available in the local impact teams to just ensure that we're not limiting the kind of interventions to just the teachers, that where more expertise is required, that should be happening in schools and through the LIT teams particularly?
I think Middletown, we're well placed to support the LIT teams, and really welcome to see how that service will develop. From our perspective, we certainly have the expertise ourselves to support the professionals within the LIT teams. We are a specialist service, as you've said, and we have that unique perspective of engaging with services north and south. And indeed, we engage with services worldwide. We were heavily involved with the Autism Europe Congress. We're involved with the International Society for Autism Research. So I think that there is a need for very specific expertise, and we're very well placed to support the LIT teams with that.
Great. And one very last question. We have all commented on the kind of constrained budget situation that we're in. And I guess what we don't talk about enough, I don't think, when it comes to special educational needs, is the value of the investment in these kids, that the progress that they make. We talk about the challenges all the time. So I've got a little bit of a concern, maybe some of the narrative around SEN is now moving into a space of talking about the cost and not enough about the value of the investment. Could you speak to that for us? Could you talk to us about why it's so important to invest in these kids and kind of the success stories, really, which we don't hear those enough?
Yeah, well, I'm happy to take that, because certainly we are so privileged to experience so many success stories. One that comes to mind just recently is a young person who'd been out of school for 19 months and is now following a lot of investment from the parent, first of all, but then 10 months of the Middletown support. He's now successfully attending school, and in fact when the coordinator went out to see him and to take him out of the classroom just to have a bit of a catch up with him, he didn't want to leave the classroom because he was so immersed in the learning that he was doing. So, you know, that is genuinely the kind of success story that we are so proud of. And whenever that support takes place and we get those kind of outcomes. So obviously the investment there is, you know, he is now, you know, back in school in a class. He's not then needing those kind of those intensive services now at home, because he is, you know, fully engaged and will work then towards qualifications, and will, you know, all being well, will go out and be a successful member of society. So we certainly see those really positive success stories, and we see young people that we're working with moving into third level education and then, you know, ultimately into employment. So again, the investment there, that these are young people that otherwise, as we so often unfortunately see, are sitting in their bedrooms, but with the right kind of support, we're able to bring them back out into society and then be contributors to society. So those success stories are really important. We are working in homes as well, as Stephen mentioned. We work across home and schools. So whenever, again, we're working in a home, we're able to support the parent, we're able to facilitate the parent to have the confidence again to take their child or their young person back out even into the shops, back out to the local leisure centre, because quite often these parents have lost confidence through negative experiences in being able to support those young persons, those really dysregulating environments. So our team's able to go out and support the parent in regaining that confidence. They have the skills and they have the knowledge, and it really tends to come down to confidence. And whenever that young person then is able to go back out into those environments and start to access clubs, societies, support groups again, then again, that really takes the pressure off the more intensive services that the parents would otherwise be having to access. So those are the kind of, was just, you can look at our model and it's 10 months of really intensive support, but as you say, the investment in that in the longer term, really, you know, you get payback on that for sure. Yeah.
Brilliant. And thank you very much, and thank you for the work that you're doing. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Michelle. John, you'd indicated next.
Yes, thank you. That was excellent, by the way. I thought it was very, very impressive. Just a couple of questions of three. I'll try and get through them quickly because I know the chair is very firm on time, rightly so. First question about whole school support. You say in section 3.71 of your briefing that it states the Education Authority can refer up to 3 schools annually for the whole school support. I mean, given their increase in the number of children with SENS, do you think this is still adequate given the pivot towards SPIMS?
I would absolutely love to see more. I would love a couple of zeros onto the end of those school referrals. In the section of the report, in terms of our annual business plan is agreed by the department, and that's obviously got a financial purse string attached to it about the numbers of schools that we can support. 3 individual referrals equals 1 whole school model. The time frame of 10 months of that intensive support is in a school is exactly the same, and that school support of a whole school model ranges from the bus drivers to the teams in the kitchens working, to the classroom assistants, to the teachers. So it's truly a genuine whole school approach. And the difference is as well, it's just not theory. We get our hands dirty. We're working with them. We're setting up sensory rooms and integration. In terms of scaling that and having a framework, one of our colleagues has actually published in terms of the most read article in Neurodiversity Journal, in terms of we have frameworks that we can comply with or send out consistently to all schools for all schools to engage with. So yes, absolutely, more money, more investment. We know purse strings are tight, but we need to think actually, how do we stretch the resources for the whole school model? So that, maybe, I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Yeah,
on
no, that's fine. In terms of funding, I mean, I've just seen a budget out, draft budget. What changes could Stormont make to ensure your funding model is more stable and predictable, so you can plan long-term services?
Well, I think multi-year funding is key. I think we're an all-island organisation, and for an all-island organisation, you'll be aware that there's 2 different financial years in the Republic versus Northern Ireland. So in terms of having future year commitments and having business plans agreed in advance and trajectories, that would be undoubtedly very helpful for us.
Very good. Okay, that reinforces that consensus. In terms of bureaucracy, finally, what administrative reporting requirements could be streamlined by Stormont to reduce your workload, allow you to focus more on the front line? So just sort of any waste we could cut there bureaucracy-wise?
I think it's having the bravery of less is more and doing it better. So I think in terms of the scattergun approach and hoping something will work, I think it's actually saying here's our key objectives and really holding our feet to the fire, if you will, and saying, have you delivered? We're very proud of our business plan, but every year it continues to grow and it continues to stretch, and people want more for less. And that's understandable because of continuous improvement, but there is a limit. And we talk about burnout in the system. The same burnout applies for my team in terms of they're dealing with, so I have to be very protective of them and go, we hear you, but let's be reasonable and let's have that multi-year funding about how you build up for capacity in the wider system. So it's all about capacity building for me.
Capacity building. Okay, thank you, and Happy New Year to you all.
Thanks, John.
Thank you. John, Donna, you'd indicated next.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Thank you. It's very informative, and a lot of the areas have been covered. I suppose we're back now a couple of years, and then the SEN action plan was, as you said, nearly a year ago. Are you seeing any improvement in the whole wage system? Because if I look at what I deal with in my constituency and in the office, it feels like to me it's getting worse, not to put a dampener and be negative going forward here, but it does seem like whether it's placements or support assessments, it does seem like more barriers have went up, and then we've had the new setup with the lit teams. I'm just wondering, how much involvement did you even have in the lit teams? Because I'm starting to hear that there's problems bubbling in that as well, and again, it feels like it's always firefighting. I just see your view on it. I do want hope. I do want us to come to the other side of this here, but it doesn't feel like it's coming.
It's a 5-year plan. We're still at, I guess, year 1, talking about planning and implementation stages. As I said in my opening, within the last 24 hours, we have got an agreement in principle to proceed with one of our delivery objectives. So in terms of having stakeholder collaborative agreements and not working in silo, I still think there's opportunities for that. I think there's opportunities for firm budgets to be put in place, and I think that's only reasonable. I don't think we're there yet. We're 1 out of the 5 years. The committee has asked about how much money has been spent in year 1. So we're all aware of the nuances and some of the numbers. With regards to the lit teams in the EA, I think there is a misconception. Was that going to happen anyway, or is that part of the SEN reform agenda? And I think that's what is actually, whenever you go out and you go, there's 125 separate action points in the SEN reform agenda. Are they all being achieved? Well, some yet to start. So I do hold hope, but I think we should be brave and go, look, if it's not working, or if there's too many objectives, or if our budget has to change, it has to change. Because there's no point in thrashing out something for 5 years if it's not working. So people should listen to the feedback and take action and change the course of direction if needed. But that's just my opinion, Danny. In terms of seeing a difference in the ground and maybe...
Yeah, I think, our relationship with LITS is strong on the ground. We had a strong relationship with AIS, they're our referral agent into learning support and assessment. And that has moved smoothly into LITs. We're receiving our referrals, the criteria, the autism leads and myself, worked on the referral criteria once it would move into LITs, and there's an agreement as well from specialist provision as to how they can refer in through that process, and that has been working well each month since LITs were set up. And the relationship, one of our key factors that has to happen within the 10 months of support is that the first level service still stays involved, although Middletown becomes the lead for that 10-month period. We want to maintain that relationship, and the member of staff from LIT has maintained that relationship, with all the young people that we're currently working with. They attend the meetings as required, so that relationship on the ground in terms of referral I see as being strong, and it's been a fluent one into that new system.
As far as placements are, so we've had this crisis and it seems to get worse every year, and I suspect we're going to have the same again this year. The misplacement of children, are you seeing that having that real detrimental impact to the whole school setup when we have children, whether they're travelling a lot of distance or they're getting into a classroom that they shouldn't be in and they end up in a reduced timetable? And one of my frustrations is they don't seem to be factored in here. If they're sitting at home, they're almost being marked in. They're almost like the invisible, forgotten child.
Often we would, I suppose, those are the children with the very high level support needs. So those are the children that are referred to us. So we will quite often support children who are on a reduced school day with the goal, or who are not attending at all in some cases. And I suppose because Middletown can provide that bridge between home and school, yes, that would. So it's maybe a slightly skewed figure for us as well, that we do see that reduced school day or that non-attender, because we are the service that can go out to the home and support the parent in getting the child back into school, and support the school in creating an environment that the child wants to leave the house and go to. So yes, we see those children, but we see really positive outcomes with those children, and we see the specialist provisions and we see the mainstream classes that want to change the structures and want to change the systems that they're using so the child wants to come into school. I can't think of a time where we've worked in a classroom that doesn't want that child to come in and doesn't want to support the work that we're doing.
I suppose I suppose if you get the support, it's like a golden ticket. I mean, like the amount of children who are falling through the gaps of the system is just completely filling them, where they don't get the support from yourselves and they're just maybe sitting at home and completely out of the system.
I think it's a topic that we're very acutely aware of, hence why our best practice day at the end of the month about emotional based school non-attendance. Yeah. But you want to try and support the system so it doesn't get to that place. In terms of having the right place, so the right support, the right place, the right people, the right time, it's a nice phrase, but it starts with, can you build buildings? Do we have enough money for capital? Can we do them? No, we can't. Can we change the hearts and minds of every school leader, every teacher, to want to welcome children with special educational needs into their school? Yeah. And actually, for those that don't, what are we going to do about them? For those schools that say, actually, there is no place for that child. And that's where the tough decisions have to be made. So I think there's certain things that freedom within a framework, we need to strengthen the frameworks that we give the school population. In terms of, if we're serious about inclusion for all, we go inclusion for all. And we support what we can, and that support starts with educational professionals and the leadership within boards of governors and schools as well. But that's not Middletown's remit, Danny. But we will be there whenever we get the nod. We will provide training for them, or they're welcome to come to us. We want that consistency, that every child is offered the same support.
That's a fair point. If there isn't £1.7 billion, then there has to be a plan B. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Danny. Gary, you had indicated next.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you all. Very, very informative. Just to go back to the training point, Fiona, did I pick you up right in terms of, you'd mentioned 7,000 teaching professionals in 2025, is that right?
I actually misspoke, and I was going to change the record. It was 2,700. I looked down quickly and I saw that it was a 2.
That's fine. My hearing and memory, both of which is not great. So 2,700. How would that compare then with, 2024, 2020? Have you any figures in terms of the trajectory?
No, it's consistent. I would say that the numbers are probably creeping up because we have increased our digital capacity. So we offer teachers now a range of ways of engaging. You know, probably in the last 3 or 4 years, our online capacity has really increased, and we've done a lot of work on, and Stephen mentioned Padlet and online supports. So I think teachers can engage with us in a number of different ways. And where you're meeting people at different points, you're increasing your capacity and your numbers in that way. So yes, I do think that there is an increase, and I think our work and partnerships on the ground with the EA are really helping to increase our interface with teaching professionals across Northern Ireland.
Would you have any concerns in terms of, that was the next question, in terms of that online training experience versus the face-to-face training experience? Would you have concerns in terms of the impact that the training is having? I can only speak from a personal perspective. I would prefer that sort of face-to-face. That's not always practical, given the fact that the vast number of people that you're trying to train and also the resources that you have. So in terms of that impact, do you see any detrimental side in terms of how teachers or those involved in the training feel?
We evaluate all of our training, so everyone who attends a Middletown training are asked very specific questions, and on our online training we ask, what has the impact of this been? And there's not an awful lot of difference between what people would rate face-to-face and what people would rate online. I think that there is a balancing point between accessibility and the quality of the face-to-face engagement. And that's the balancing act that we do try to walk. We want to meet people where they're at. But I agree with you. I do think that by and large face-to-face engagement is where you want to be. And as Stephen said, we had a best practice day in Belfast there last May, and I won't misspeak this time, there was 300 people at it, and that was a very strong face-to-face engagement. And some of the feedback that we got on that day was it was just really nice to see other people.
Absolutely.
So it is a balance.
You know, it is. And in terms of the online and sort of building those communities, so you do the training and afterwards, I think a lot of it, as you say, it's about sharing experiences, lived experience and all of that. What then is preventing at this minute in time, because I'm assuming it's fairly low cost in terms of those online community hubs, I think, Stephen, that you referred to, what is preventing those from existing now? Is there particular legislative gaps that would prevent that type of community being set up?
I can't speak to any legislative gaps. I think there's potentially a communication gap. Like sometimes I'm speaking to people and they'll say, "Oh, I didn't know that existed." Okay. So I think we come back to this idea of consistency, and it's consistency in communication. And I think the Minister is working on the Transform Ed, and I think part of the Transform Ed is going to be a consistent way of teachers getting that communication. And I think the Minister's working on a digital portal, and he's hoping to streamline communication, and I think that'll really help.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Cara, you'd indicated.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much. It's great to see you all again. And I just have 2 questions today, which you had touched there on emotional and anxiety-based school avoidance, and you made some really valid points. And I know the pupil attendance strategy is currently live until March. I'm mindful you're really the experts in this field when it comes to neurodivergence and non-school attendance. So I was just curious, do you think there's anything that we're missing from a committee perspective? Is there anything you could tell us today that maybe we've overlooked or we should be feeding back to the department? And Danny had mentioned there around reduced timetables. Previously, we had a session where the EA was unable to clarify what data or monitoring currently exists with reduced timetables and how many are to do with neurodivergence or young people with special educational needs. Is that something that concerns you? Is it something that you've come across, or is there any feedback you can give us?
Yeah, I mean, we are, I think, as anybody that works in health or education, very concerned with the very obvious increase in numbers of young people who are just too anxious to attend school. I think looking at maybe not so much what's missing, but I think the key factor for success in this will be greater collaboration between health and education in meeting the needs of these young people, because whilst it appears to be primarily an education issue because the goal is to get them into school, which sits with education, the needs, the reason that they can't access school is anxiety, which then obviously is a health need. So I think if we can get, and health is doing excellent work in this area of meeting those mental health needs of those young people. Education is doing excellent work in trying to create school environments that are going to be more accessible for our neurodivergent young people. But I think those two strands need to come together. So when we have a young person who cannot leave the house to go to school, that needs a joined up approach from health and education services. And I think we are definitely working in that direction. I've had conversations recently with education welfare, with education psychologists. We've done some training alongside Beechcroft's services. And I think there is definitely much more collaborative work happening in this area. And that can only be a good thing for these children and young people.
I think as well, Cara, from a system point of view, has the school done everything they can to support the child? How do we robustly measure it? What's the trends? Now, we talk about data and syncing in data. Some data we absolutely need. And then once we have that data, what is the plan? What is that transition? So at the minute, it's all or nothing. Either you go to school or you don't. That's it. So if you look at other jurisdictions in the south, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with iSchool as well in terms of the transition service and some of the support, I think we need to think differently and about what remote service is that keeps children in education, although it may not be in the traditional sense of the classroom environment in a physical setting. And that's one thing that where online could be particularly useful in terms of that transition, in terms of they don't want to cross over the doorstep of the school, but they may engage with the teacher, etc., or some online learning, and the small steps to get encouragement and trust. And a school sense of belonging doesn't need to be in a school. The school community
that's
should
really
extend beyond
fascinating. That's actually something I haven't looked at on a cross-border basis, just to see what they're doing on the south. And I really respect the work that you're doing on an all-island basis.
To stay, Cara.
That's definitely something we can look as a committee. Just lastly, then, if you could change 3 things. I know you've talked a lot today around frameworks and the importance of training, but looking at wider issues around policy and system design, what do you think would improve outcomes for children with autism and their families? What would they be?
Wow, what a
How
big,
long's a piece of string?
what a big question in terms of outcomes for children. I think reassurance, and I think people knowing what the journey looks like. The parents that we speak to, the transition, the cliff edge. We talk about the raising the school education edge. So what's happening for children with special educational needs? I think there's some strong, big questions that need answers with, and that's where I'd look to leadership in this room. Services like Middletown will help provide and help do the training and all the support and all the care, but actually it's the legislative differences that actually will really help a system and being brave and making some bold decisions on that. Whether that's transitions from primary, post-primary, finding a place, knowing there's alternatives out there. Every person just wants the best for their child, and a lot of the teaching in the schools, they just want the best for their child as well and for their pupils. So.
And I know that you've done amazing work sort of guiding parents through what to expect through Middletown. So no, that's it for me. Thank you so much. I think when you talk about the need for reassurance, it's definitely something as a committee that we should be tapping into and providing for families. So no, thank you so much. That's all the questions that I have today. And again, thank you all for the work that you're doing.
Thank you, Cara. Could I just ask, just to your last point there, Stephen, in relation to you said about if there's legislative change needed, is there anything that from your engagement with the system looking at it you think that is either a legislative change that's required or a statutory duty that the department has or the EA have that actually hinders making progress for children? Is there something, can you see something clear there that needs addressed?
I think whenever you look in terms of the transition pathways, whenever a child in special educational needs hits 14, in terms of signing up to what we say we already do, in terms of career and transition pathways and services, how robustly do we measure if those actually take place? In terms of whenever we look at individual learning plans for children, how many of the goals and outcomes are achieved? So I think it's actually pressing pause and looking at the reality and taking on the facts. And then also if you look at other jurisdictions such as England, in terms of the educational age for children with special educational need. And we know things like Caleb's Cause has been great to bring that to the fore. But at some stage we have to say, okay, we hear it, we acknowledge it, and we're deciding to either do it or go against it. Because at the minute we're in this series of perpetuate, and our children and young people are becoming members of society. And I guess I would finish on, what's the purpose of education? Is to equip children into wider society. So you can do all the front end stuff, but unless we're doing that back end thing, I think we're missing a big part. So I think in terms of legislative changes, that could be stronger, and that transition into adult services.
That's really, really helpful. Thank you, Stephen. And Kathy, you just indicated there.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks very much for the presentation. There's probably about 10 different questions I could ask you, to be honest. But I wanted to come back on a couple of points that have already been raised, and one of them is around, we've heard from Senkos, we've heard from teachers the whole way through our inquiry, and what we seem to hear time and again is, in theory, this sounds brilliant. This actually sounds like this would tick all the boxes, but the reality of it doesn't seem to match up with that. And you mentioned, Stephen, a couple of times about having to listen to Senkos, having to listen to teachers and principals and all those classroom assistants. And unfortunately they don't. What we're getting is that they don't feel like they are being listened to at this minute in time, and possibly, whilst we are at year one, it's got off to the wrong foot, or off on the wrong foot. And one of the things actually is that has been raised to us is around the referrals, and that system and how that's working and how that's impacting on Senkos. What can be done now? We have started off on this course. What can be done now by the department, do you think, to try and bring those people now on board and maybe regain a wee bit of that trust in this?
People to feel listened to and to hear their words mentioned back to them. So the Senkos, and you hear it and we acknowledge it, but that's for department officials and for the wider system to get together and, more importantly, say, okay, this is what we're going to do about it. And I'm very conscious that the department have recently asked for schools for projects and for nominations. I would encourage any of those Senkos. I know the workload's a lot, but to be brave, to register for some of those and to speak up. And sometimes we have to follow the system and the process. So the little pockets of the feedback, you have to keep talking. It's whenever people stop talking and they leave the system, that's the real worry for me. We cannot get there. So we should be welcoming them, we should be giving them a safe environment, and we should be encouraging that. It's just for me, it's just basic leadership.
Yeah, and unfortunately we are hearing that of people leaving the sector now. One of the other things that we mentioned there was around, I think somebody mentioned it about, maybe choosing this as a career, teachers choosing this now and choosing to go into special educational needs. I don't think that's the case anymore. I don't think you choose to go into special educational needs, because in mainstream education now we're dealing with this anyway, so it is a case of, if you're going into teaching, that's what you're going into now. It's one case in particular I was dealing with over the Christmas break, actually, where it was a relatively young teacher who had no training. I think it was one module they said they'd had on this. They are sub-teacher, so they are being dropped into these different classes with all these different dynamics. So there is going to be a cohort of people there who aren't in a school full time and don't avail of ongoing training. How do we deal with that, or how do we capture that cohort of people? Because this teacher actually was telling me that over the Christmas break they were going and doing loads of research themselves on different practices, and they were looking at different, and the way they do things in the south as well, to try and equip themselves with this.
Yeah, Cathy, I go back to that simple example, talking about Christmas and retail and people and stacking shelves. It's our duty in the system to provide that support to them. Public servants' duty. They shouldn't have to ask, they shouldn't have to see it. We need to change the system, and we need to provide it for them. As we say, 1 in 5 neurodivergent children. Every teacher is a teacher of SEN. Now we need to change that mindset and see if they don't want to join the system, don't join the system. If it's too complex, if you want to read from a textbook, but we know it's pastoral care, and we're thankful that the Northern Irish community is engaged with teaching. They want to make a difference. So I think in terms of changing the process and changing how we support, how we induct, and pausing, we stop for summer breaks. We know that teachers are already doing things.
Mm-hmm.
We can provide support in terms of Middletown. You may not just be able to come to our site at the moment, but we can meet you online or we can meet you somewhere else, and we can provide you over those summer months, and we can provide that support. So there is ways and means.
Kathy, I'll just follow up with what Stephen's saying by saying that a neuroaffirming approach is something that will embrace all children with all needs, and that's something that Middletown has really taken the lead with in Northern Ireland in terms of understanding neurodiversity and having a neuroaffirming approach which sees a diversity and a difference rather than a disability. So for the people that you're speaking to, my advice to them would be, certainly you can attend Middletown training. You don't have to be working in a specific school. As I've explained to your colleague there, we have online sessions, we have coaching sessions, we have face-to-face sessions, as Jill has said. We have an upcoming best practice day, and it's our autonomy as a cross-border ALB that allows us to create these learning opportunities for everybody. You know, so for grandparents, for cousins, for family members, for teachers who are in a school, for teachers who are out of a school. And you mentioned research, and I know that research is something, again, that features very much in the Transform Ed. And Middletown have always had research at the heart of our work. So the person that you're speaking to is doing their own research. They can drop us an email. We'd be happy to support them. We have online research bulletins. We have an online journal which is completely co-produced with autistic researchers. So we are a neuroaffirming organisation, and we have a range of resources that could support the very people that you're speaking about.
We're making it harder than it needs to be.
Just one lot.
Yeah,
Could
very
we
briefly.
it's just to ask about the details of the session that you mentioned in the City North.
Yes, that's our best practice day on supporting emotionally based school non-attendance, and it's on the 22nd of January, Thursday. And yes, everybody is welcome. You will need to register, otherwise you won't get lunch.
I maybe ask that you circulate that through
Absolutely,
the clerk,
yes,
even just
we
so
can
we
do
all
that,
get that,
and
because
we'd
I
be
think
delighted to
it would
see
be
any of you at that. And it is an
plenty of
opportunity
interest.
that, you know, as Cara had said about, you know, sharing the practice across both jurisdictions, and that's exactly what that day set up. It's 50-50 presentation between professionals in Northern Ireland and professionals in the Republic of Ireland.
And I could add just the inclusion symposium as well. Both those I think would be likely to be of interest to members if you could share that. Sorry, Steve.
People can listen to us, but actually listening to those that are on the ground every day in a school carries more weight and more power, and that's where if they're doing it, we can do it. So it's actually harnessing that positive energy and actually creating that momentum ourselves.
That's great. Look, this has been a great session. There's so many more things I think everyone would like to ask. I think the Deputy Chair's asked if you could come in briefly, and I have maybe one
clarity
more
I'm looking for. You mentioned earlier hand flapping, and you also mentioned stimming. Is there a difference between the two?
Well, in terms of stimming, in terms of, and Fiona can pick up upon this, we have a lot of children in terms of sensory eye movement and stimming, so it can be head movements in terms of that. It's in terms of sensory body movements, in terms of flapping, so they are two distinct things, and note it in terms of sensory regulation. But
well, the term stimming is an abbreviation of self-stimulatory behaviour, and you know, I think that's fairly explanatory that we all engage in self-stimulatory behaviour. But the term stimming is used a lot within the autism community, and you know, that's very, very variable from person to person, and sometimes that can involve hand movements and sometimes it doesn't, but it's very variable, and indeed it's not exclusively for autistic people either. All of us engage in self-soothing behaviours.
And is hand flapping something completely different?
Well, I suppose it's very individualised from person to person. Some people would say that, you know, some people engaging in self-stimulatory behaviour may move their hands.
The only reason I'm asking is we heard evidence at the committee some time ago of an autistic child who was in a mainstream class and was stimming, and it was the hands that were being used, and the child's hands were tied to the chair with a school bag. So that's the only reason I'm asking.
And then in terms of expression and everyone that expressing themselves, we'll know whenever there's true change in society, whenever there's members of this committee hand stimming or members, that's whenever we've truly made a difference and we're truly an inclusive society, that it'll be no more the odd person, that it is representative of the 1 in 5, that people don't have to do masking. So we encourage people to be themselves and not to mask. So think about that yourselves. There's probably, in terms of the numbers, and I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Stephen. I wanted to ask something just to finish, because I think if we've got you here, we may as well get the best evidence we can. We're very, very short in time. One of the issues, and obviously you're embedded in schools and you're seeing, what can work for neurodiverse children and young people. One of the vexed issues we've had across this inquiry has been around the role of classroom assistants, whether a one-to-one adult being assigned to a child is the gold standard, or if we need to look to other approaches and a reformed model. And we heard very clear evidence from the EA. They really feel that a reformed model of support for children with a statement, in particular at that point when they're formally statemented. Do you have a view on that? I appreciate I'm not giving you much time to answer, but is that something that you have a view on, or is it down to what's best for the child?
It's what's best for the child. There will be circumstances, there'll be inevitably one-to-ones will always be required, but there's a certain level of expertise and career pathways that I'd want to see for classroom assistants being developed. We should have experts in different areas and empower them to do that. That may mean less of them, experts, but there needs to be more thought given to it and about, rather than a one-size-fits-all. It's not either or, it's and for me. I'm not sure.
It's a flexible model of support,
absolutely,
rather than we need a particular model that applies to everybody.
Yeah.
Okay. No, that's really helpful. Look, thank you so much for your time. It's been a really useful evidence session. So we appreciate your time. And if you could send those dates through, I think there might be interest for members to attend.
See you then.
Thank you.
Okay, members, we covered a lot of ground there, and a lot of good stuff, I think, to take away for the inquiry evidence. I can see that Cara's indicated there's nothing specific for me other than ensuring that is properly logged and noted for the inquiry evidence. I actually think already there was evidence we've heard there that I would hope would inform our recommendations coming out of the inquiry. It was incredibly helpful. But Cara, did you want to come in with something?
Yeah, just to say, I found it a really helpful session, particularly around the emotional based school avoidance aspect of things. And I know they had mentioned the IE school, if I'm getting that right, that exists in the south. I'm just wondering, is there any sort of questions we could put forward to the department as a committee to explore? Have they explored anything like this in the north? Because I know it just looks so helpful, and while this was on, I was briefly just looking through it online, and it looks at school leavers between 13 and 16, which is a really important age in their education. And yeah, I just thought it was a really interesting aspect I think we haven't really thought of in the answer of the issue of anxiety-based school avoidance. Sorry, I'm rambling.
No, that's great, Cara. As I'd said at the start, we do looking at the forward work plan. It looks like we have the department and EA in on attendance issues. So I don't know whether even through the clerk that's something we could ask them to reflect in their evidence when they come to committee in terms of what learning they have taken from anything in any neighbouring jurisdictions, but particularly the south, given what we've heard today. So
they're coming on the 11th of February, so we should have time to add that to the commissioning.
If you're content with, if members are content with that. Any other actions arising, or are we content to note for the inquiry evidence then? Great. Okay. So that takes us on to the next item on the agenda. I think I possibly got out of sync with my ordering when I introduced the last item. I announced it as item 7. This is now item 7 on the agenda, and it's an oral briefing from Smartphone Free Childhood. So while the witnesses are coming through, I would draw members' attention to the briefing note from the committee clerk at page 92, and then the briefing paper provided by Smartphone Free Childhood at page 93. I'll just let the witnesses come through.
Hi.
Take a seat. So while you're getting seated, so we have joining us today. We have Rosalind McClean from Smartphone Free Childhood, who is the Northern Ireland Regional Co-Leader, and I have Peter Cosgrove down. Is Peter not able to join us today?
No. Sent us apologies.
No, that's absolutely fine. So then we also have Charlotte Carson from Smartphone Free Childhood, but is also a parent and teacher. And if you want to give any further details in terms of your professional background, either of you, that's absolutely fine. So any sort of wider introductions I'll leave to yourselves, but you're very welcome here at committee today. I know it's taken a wee bit of time to get this the briefing scheduled. We are a busy committee with a lot of different groups looking to present, but we are really pleased to have you here. So I'm going to hand over really to yourselves for any initial presentation that you want to make. Obviously, we've got copies of your report in front of us in our packs. If I could ask for that to be up to 10 minutes.
Yes.
And then we'll move into question and answer. And again, we try for each member to keep each inquiry in the region of 5 minutes per member, just so we can get through the evidence and everyone has an opportunity to ask their questions. But over to yourselves.
Okay, well look, thank you, Chairperson, for your welcome and for having us here today. My name is Rosalind McClean and I'm involved in this campaign as a mother of 3 children. I have in my bag some props. This is what phones looked like in the early noughties when I got my first phone at 4th form at school. This is what phones look like now. 20 years on, the landscape has really changed, and our young people and children are carrying around supercomputers in their pockets with 24/7 access to the world and everyone and everything in it. Ofcom data shows that 1/3 of 6 to 7-year-olds have their own smartphones, and by the end of primary school, almost all children do. These devices were not designed with children in mind, and Steve Jobs, it was reported in the New York Times, when asked if his children liked using the iPad, he said they haven't used it. We limit how much technology our children use at home. I have spoken with scores of teachers and parents since becoming involved in the movement. One P5 teacher told me of how children plan on WhatsApp the night before which child they're going to target at school the next day. Another P7 parent told me of a girl who was asked a personal question by 2 friends who were unknowingly recording her, and they then sent it to a P7 WhatsApp group, and she didn't want to go back to school. We're expecting a lot of our children in responding to this kind of thing. And those are only cyberbullying incidents with children they know in real life. I could speak of the contact with people they meet online, with the growing numbers of sextortion being reported to the PSNI. The 51% of 13-year-olds who have been exposed to hardcore pornography. Pornography now is misogynistic, degrading to women, and very violent. And in a society which is struggling with violence against women and girls, we should be really concerned about that. I could also speak about the Amnesty International research showing how the TikTok for You algorithms take our children down rabbit holes, romanticising things like self-harm and suicide through their videos. And our data set shows how these kind of incidents are presenting themselves at emergency departments in Northern Ireland. But lots of the issues aren't really about smartphones. They're about unrestricted access to the internet, and smartphones seem to be the main gateway for our young people to that. The majority of people do share my concerns to some extent. 94% of primary school parents polled by Parentkind, the PTA charity, which included Northern Ireland data, said that they felt smartphones were harmful. So why on earth do 90% of 12-year-olds have smartphones and not buying them themselves? Well, parents everywhere feel like we've been put in an impossible position. We either give our children something which we know as parents ourselves we can find quite addictive, or we risk alienating them from their peers at a crucial stage in their development. And that is where smartphone-free childhood comes in. We bring parents together at a local school level, and you make a voluntary pact with parents in your child's class saying, let's all delay, and no child comes home and says, I'm the only one without one. And many of us are starting out giving our children more basic phones as a starter. This isn't about judging parents. We recognise that our children are going to be probably too old by the time the government acts on this. And in the meantime, it's about us as parents coming together because we want more for the next generation. And thousands of parents have already signed our pact across about 350 schools in Northern Ireland. So why are we here at Education Committee? We're a grassroots movement trying to make cultural change. Well, prior to my involvement in the movement, if you had told me it was commonplace for children to be asked to use their own smartphone in class, I wouldn't have believed you. But that is not the case everywhere, but that is the case in a number of our schools, or even with a number of teachers in a school which is otherwise great. And that has happened particularly growing since COVID and the use of educational technology has accelerated. So using it for things like research in class, Google Classroom, interactive quizzes. And when we started out in 2024, it was quite hard to find genuinely fully phone-free schools. Parents can't delay when we give our children smartphones if our schools ask them to use it. And so we called on the Department of Education to remove smartphones from schools. And the guidance that they issued in 2024, it's well drafted. It is placed under safeguarding statutes, which gives it more legal weight than many maybe actually realise. And it makes it really clear that secondary schools should be phone free from bell to bell. But for us, the concern remains. We've done a couple of surveys, and it seems that the way that is being adopted is still very mixed. Lots of schools have good policy on paper, but many still allow a so-called permitted use policy for educational purposes. I think we all know it's not possible to supervise 30 teens in one room on 30 devices connected to 4 or 5G. Aside from the distraction and the huge safeguarding risks, Lucy Crane, in her review of the Northern Ireland curriculum, acknowledged that schools' permitted use of smartphones in schools puts undue pressure on parents who either don't want to or genuinely cannot afford to give their child a smartphone. And so we are therefore asking what is needed to make this fully uniform. And some principals themselves have suggested to us that legislation would actually level the playing field, and it would make it really, really clear. Other areas such as Barnet and London are going for bricks only, and a phased out approach. So this year, the new year are only allowed brick phones. The following year it would be year 8 and year 9, and hopefully we can come on to that in our questions.
Lovely, thank you. A brick phone means a Nokia, by the way. So my name's Charlotte Carson. I'm a teacher. I'm also a parent, and I met Rosalind last year, and I just think it's really worth reflecting on how quickly this movement has grown, because it was February 2024, I think, that I got a message from a friend of mine in Shoreham in the south coast of England saying, oh, there's this great group that started over here. You should see if it exists where you are. And I searched it out and found Rosalind and a few others, and we've been doing this work ever since. So it's only 18 months or something, and this just shows how many parents are so hungry for something to change, either for the benefit of their own kids right now, or because they want to be part of making things better for the next generation down the line. So I'm here to talk to you a little bit about the teacher's perspective on the impact of smartphones and the lack of them in schools. So I first asked a head teacher in 2018 to ban phones when I was still working in London, and a child had been given effectively what amounted to child pornography on a WhatsApp group, and the police were involved, and it was awful. And my response to the head teacher was, can we just make a rule that we ban phones? And he said, oh, I can't fight a battle that I'm not going to win. And I just thought, okay, all right, so that's what it is. Each individual head teacher has to, fight their own battle. Whereas if we have legislation, we're not asking head teachers to fight battles with their parents or their communities. But so I'm very pleased that my school is part of the pilot at the minute. So I've got some feedback here from our teacher survey that we sent out in December. We've got, out of 72 teachers that responded, I'm at St Ronan's in Lurgan, 100% said the classroom management has improved since September with the pouches. 98.6% said they strongly support this policy. Now, if you'd asked maybe 3-4 years ago, which I was doing, teachers, would they go phone free? Lots of them didn't like the idea. They felt that it was too much, or sometimes kids need their phone, or I like to get them to do their own research. There was loads of what ifs. So the idea that, you know, almost all of our teachers are fully supporting this really tells you that things have shifted quite a lot in a short space of time with our attitudes to the harm that can be done by smartphones broadly, but especially in school. My deputy head, who's in charge of this project, said there's been a significant drop in child protection issues this term. And she said largely that could be to do with the fact that when we did have phones before, and let's say there was a fight in the boys' toilet or something like that, it would be recorded and then that would be shared. And Rosalind was telling me earlier about some work done down south, talking about how actually that makes boys fight harder. Isn't that so frightening? Do they know they're being videoed, so they fight even harder? So really, she has said we've seen a significant drop in this kind of thing because the phones aren't there. This is massively supported by the teaching unions, both the NEHT and the NEU, which I'm the vice president of currently. I spoke to our head of year 10. I asked him, how does this year feel compared to last year? Because obviously heads of year are doing all the pastoral work. He said it's night and day. It is night and day. I mean, the absence of phones in our school has really, really dramatically changed, you know, what kind of problems. We still have problems, but they're not those kinds of problems. And a huge increase in general sort of behaviour, happiness, social. Where's my wee data there? Oh, yeah. So we've had feedback also from parents saying they want it just to be a rule coming from above, because they feel that they also will be able to send their kids in, you know, confident that it's not just your school that's doing it, or if they have brothers and sisters at different schools, that it's across the board. So we're hearing that parents want this to be a blanket rule. The head teachers, deputy heads that I've spoken to think that this should be linked to ETI inspections and monitoring, linked to safeguarding. They think it needs continual reinforcement, and the people involved in the pilot especially feel that, you know, they will have had a year of time to build best practice and, you know, model policies, and I think, you know, many of them feel that they're in a position to offer that guidance to other schools. I also want to talk about the criminalisation of our young people. We put a mobile phone, a smartphone in their hands. We're making it possible for them to do harm. You know, we don't let them have knives. We don't let them have other implements in school that could cause harm, and yet we allow them to have a mobile phone, which they could use to, you know, distribute images, to do harm to teachers. I'm sure you're familiar with the case of the NAS rep Sally Rees and the down-blousing issue, and that was a child in her school. You know, so we're allowing them to do these criminal acts if we give them the means with which to do them during the school day. So I think it's really important to protect our children from criminalising themselves. Also, it is part of the programme for government to tackle violence against women and girls, and yet we know that online misogyny, the mountain of violent online pornography that is normal for our young men and women to be looking at, that tells us that, you know, we really do have a crisis of violence against women on our hands, and schools are a good place, you know, to start tackling that, and certainly getting rid of phones is the first step in that.
Okay. Thank you. So I'd start with the pilot, because you've referenced that, and obviously you've direct experience of the pilot at your own school. One of the things that we've discussed sort of back and forth around this committee is not really the principle of whether it's good to have smartphones in school or not. I think there seems to be broad agreement that limiting or restricting smartphone use in schools is a good thing. It's probably more, do we need a big capital outlay to make that happen? So from your perspective, how important are the pouches, that bit of tech, to actually make that work? Or are you aware of good practice in other schools whereby the usage can be restricted without that spend, because the spend would be substantial across the school estate. I mean, it would, and in the budgetary position we're in, possibly not deliverable. So it's always a worry if we run pilots that can't be, scaled up. Do you have a view on that?
I think we're aware of very good practice in other schools that don't have pouches.
Yeah.
So,
look, we've seen schools, they put them all in the box, it's locked into the form teacher's store, it's collected again at the end of the day. We're seeing different ways of doing it that seem to be very effective, and we're seeing in other places like in London where it's now you can only come to school with a basic phone. It can't have a camera, all of that. We also see in England that it is quite common for schools to say, if you want to bring a smartphone to school, you need a pouch. I know it's an extra £12 or so on top of your uniform cost, but that is what other places are doing. So no, we are not precious about how things have done. The very first school that we saw do this really well was Lisneal. And we've made a video with them, and that started off with shoe boxes, and if you didn't want your phone cracked, you put it in a sock, and that kind of leadership and doing that was really effective. So no, we have seen lots of different ways to do it. What I hope will be very effective and beneficial from the pilot is that we're getting this kind of testimony, but we're also getting evidence of how useful it is. So that would be our view. There's lots of different ways of doing it. We have seen lots of schools not act, and I think anywhere where we see action, whether it's pouches or otherwise, we'll celebrate that and thank those schools for taking action.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. It's the principle rather than the method is the key here with this. So that is helpful. I wanted to ask a little bit about parental education. I mean, by the time, certainly by post-primary school, when children get to that age, but often earlier, they're already smartphone users. So schools are really dealing with a cultural phenomenon that exists outside the school gates. Do you have a view on, and I think your briefing does refer to it, about the need maybe for quite early parent education programmes being delivered, be that through health channels, education channels around healthy screen time and the impact of tech on young children?
So, Dr. Cosgrove and I have met with the Department of Health, and we met with the Minister for Health in his constituency capacity. And I do think this needs to be starting at the health visitor stage. I have delivered talks to groups of preschool mums, and it's actually the easiest time to talk about it. It's not contentious. They think, I'll never do that. Of course I won't. So absolutely, parental education is really, really key in this. And I suppose there's the children that already have smartphones, and there's so many great organisations doing work to help those families and parents in that situation, and then we need a different level of education, which is saying, is this really what you want for your child? And I think what we do in bringing those parents together is really helpful as well, because none of us want our children to be left out.
There's lots of things I could ask. The last question I wanted to ask was in relation to young people themselves. So the Youth Assembly, for example, they released a report into the issue around smartphones in schools, and there was a range of views, and not all young people, as probably wouldn't come as a huge surprise, were necessarily that keen on the idea of an outright ban of smartphones in schools. Do you have a view on that in terms of how we can engage meaningfully with young people to ensure that their voices are heard in this, and that the right balance is struck there? Because I think my sense would be when young people feel things are being done to them and they're not part of that consultation process, it does limit prospects of success.
Yeah. I'm going to talk to maybe the students who talk to you about their younger siblings, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So I teach politics and history, and I tell my students quite a lot about what I'm doing all the time. And when I first met them, a year and a half ago, they were like, "What are you doing? You're like, all that campaigning, that smartphone, right? Okay." And then a few months down the line, they were knocking on my door. "Miss, we think you're right. We think that was a good idea, and I wouldn't want my 12-year-old sister to have to go through what I went through." One of my sixth formers that I teach at the minute, she told me that she has seen a man kill himself on TikTok with a rifle through his chin. She's seen that. I cannot believe that. You know, my 13-year-old son saw the Charlie Kirk murder in the playground of his school, which is meant to be phone free. But one of his friends sneaked into the playground, his phone, and showed them all. I mean, I do not want our young people to see these horrific acts of violence, what we used to call snuff, you know, in the past, and that's now TikTok. You know, so I think a lot of my students are really on board with this movement. They were a bit grumbly when they heard that we were going to be going phone free, but now they're all really on board with it. They accept it. They talk about the fact that they do have more chats in school. You know, there's a bit more buzz around the canteen, and they're really, really supportive of it. There was a Guardian article a couple of months ago, interviewed a whole load of 18-year-olds who said, my parents didn't have a clue. I would not give my children smartphones. Right, so these are, you know, kids who've lived through this generation saying, why have you let this happen to us? We're not going to give our kids smartphones. So I think the children's voices are very important for us to listen to get the evidence, to see what's happening to them.
And the Parent Kind poll, you know, 2/3 of them have said, 2/3 of 16 to 18-year-olds say that they think smartphones are harmful. So I suppose, you know, it's hard taking it away, and I don't think that's what we're saying, taking it all right away. We're really promoting this principle of delay, and actually young people want to be where other young people are. So if everyone's on TikTok, you want to be on TikTok. If everyone's not there and the government is funding our youth clubs and they're down there, then they want to be there. So I suppose this isn't a discussion about social media, it's about phones in schools. So we'll maybe not, you know, get into that as deeply, but I think this sort of narrative that young people's voices aren't being heard is a little misleading. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Look, I'll bring the Deputy Chair in, and then if members can indicate.
Sure, thanks for coming in. I mean, I know a certain 13-year-old girl, she'll be 14 in March, and hasn't got a phone. And this has nothing to do with me, but my other half is made of sterner stuff than me, because with all the tantrums and crying and so on about she's only one of 3 in her class that hasn't got a phone, and she wouldn't even, if you give her one of the old phones, she'd probably throw it at you, because they want the smartphone to go on TikTok or whatever other platforms they use. And I know the best way to deal with that is if you get more parents involved and there isn't that same level of peer pressure, you know, that there's only a small minority of kids in the class who haven't got smartphones. But in the real world, you know, how would you advise parents to deal with that? You know, if there are those tantrums and meltdowns and crying, and you know, I'm looked on as almost stupid because I haven't got a phone.
Well, I would probably encourage parents to watch something maybe like The Social Dilemma with their child, to work out maybe at first whether they think something's age appropriate, and to watch it together. Something that shows young people what really is going on with the algorithm and with big tech, and how, you know, we think these things are free. Social media is free. If something is free, you're the product. And I think parents in our community who are like you, holding out, have found...
I'm not holding out. I would have given that a long time ago.
Yeah. Well, parents have found that, you know, actually discussing this, really explaining to their children, this is how an algorithm works, this is how the profit model of a big tech company works, is helpful. But I also think we just need more parents to come together. And if you look at some of the schools, you look at St Bride's, for example, or Grange Park in Bangor, you've got well over 100 children signed up in those schools. And I think where our movement, where people know about us, it grows. And that's what we need, because then the child isn't the only one or the only 2 in the class without it. It is a lot to ask of a child, but we're really seeing a massive change, you know, in where this was 18 months ago to now, there's a lot of year 8s this year with a basic phone. Last year, there weren't as many.
And I suppose there are really two issues here. There's the issue of schools and phone, and then there's the issue of kids being able to access social media and all these different platforms and so on, and viewing stuff like hardcore pornography, or people being killed and that sort of brutal stuff. And you'll be aware that Australia brought a ban in on under 16s viewing social media. But I saw an article just last week, I think it was, a mother in one of the big newspapers in Australia saying the young people have already found a way around that. So how do we deal with that particular issue? I'm sort of moving away from phones in schools.
Well, can I respond to that? It's really about culture shift. Look, smoking wasn't allowed in my school, but there were still a few people, maybe you were one of them, who were sneaking out and finding somewhere to do it, right? But the school didn't say, do you know what? People are sneaking out and having a smoke, so we shouldn't have the rule against smoking. You don't withdraw a rule or make your rules according to what you think people will do. And so I think it's really interesting to watch what's happening in Australia with the social media ban. And of course kids get round things. They always do. We know that as parents. Kids get round whatever they can, which is why we need rules that protect them. We need a culture shift in our schools. And almost back to what you were saying before about how do parents withstand the pressure. Schools have a role to play in that. When my children are expected to do their homework on Google Classroom or Seesaw in P4, P5, and they're meant to be accessing a screen, that means I, as a parent, am meant to give them some kind of screen to do that on. Or I print them out myself if I've got a printer at home, or I print them out at work, or whatever it is. So I think we need to also think about what schools are doing to promote, reading. Today, the National Literacy Bookmark Charity has launched this Love of Reading campaign. We need to get paper back into our kids' hands. We need them to be reading books. We need to get them to do their homework in a book instead of this kind of taking your mummy's phone and trying to see what it says. And, I think schools have a role to play in shifting the culture so that, yes, people will get around it. Yes, people will break the rules. They always will. That will never change. But that doesn't mean that we set the standard with the rule to say this is what we believe is healthy and safe and right.
Okay, thanks for that. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. Michelle, you'd indicated.
Thank you very much, Chair. Can I apologise that I only have a couple of minutes because I have to go to something here that, to be honest, I have to go and pick up a child from a school bus. Look, I'm a really big fan of this campaign. I know I have been delighted to do some events on behalf of Smartphone Childhood in my own constituency, and that kind of grassroots approach I think has been really powerful, and perhaps is very much plugging a gap where policy and where government hasn't perhaps intervened quickly enough on this issue. And I like very much that your emphasis is very much that you're not about being anti-technology, you're about being pro-childhood, and I think that's an important thing to underline. And also that you're not here to judge parents either. This is about, or schools necessarily, this is about trying to get this right for our kids predominantly. The impact on phones in schools, I think you've already alluded to this, Rosalind, happens before they start school. And it can impact though in the foundation year. We hear a lot of evidence, and certainly when I'm out at schools, they talk about the lack of school preparedness now for kids coming into school, and they attribute a lot of that to screen time. Do you think it's time that we had proper guidance from health on what is the appropriate screen time for young kids or at different ages?
Yes, I do. The online safety bill, the Safer Phones bill, rather, that went to Parliament was debated, I think, in passed its second reading around March. I'm not 100% sure. I think it has been withdrawn. But one of the commitments within that was that the 4 chief medical officers of the 4 UK nations were to update the screen time report and evidence because it is outdated. Look, I suppose screen time in a way is always, it depends what you're doing on a screen, but I think overall, if our 12-year-olds are spending on average 29 hours a week on screens, we do need to look at the opportunity cost. What are they missing out on in the real world? And I think that, you know, goes back, yes, for toddlers and all of the rest as well. I would refer parents to health professionals for safer screens. While there is a vacuum of information coming from the government, those are Dr. Cosgrove is one of the key members there, and they have given screen time guidance for each year group, and they have a very helpful website.
Okay, thank you. Other question is around, we've talked about policies in schools and there is guidance there. I'm hearing increasingly from parents though that in terms of particularly choosing their post-primary school, that understanding what the school's policy is on mobile phones is increasingly becoming almost persuasive for parents. Do you think it's time for that to be something that's compulsory within school prospectuses, that transparency is something that parents can expect to see, and to judge that then between schools to give them some certainty around what those policies would be?
Well, yes and no. No, in the sense that the guidance is placed under safeguarding statutes, and any school not fully adopting the guidance of 2024, in my view, is running a serious safeguarding risk. And we saw what happened with the Methody civil case, for example, which did involve phones on a school trip. So no, in the sense everyone should be adopting this, and yes, there is freedom how you do it, and pouches or pockets or bags or whatever it is. But yes, this is a massive thing. There's a big debate. We have 1,500 on our WhatsApp community, and this was a debate last night because the open nights are this week. And but all parents should be asking this at open nights, because that signals this is important. But what a policy says on paper doesn't always mean that that's what's being implemented. And I have heard of schools where they have told Year 8 parents at induction, we are fully phone free. They have presented a lot of evidence why they are, and then their child has gone into class and been asked to bring it out for a maths quiz to duplicate. And, you know, really, I think if you ask a parent of an existing child at the school what the policy is, that is very key. Yeah, but absolutely, I would love schools to have that accountability. They need to be very clear what it is, not only in policy but in practice. Yeah.
So the next bit of that is obviously then ETI's engagement to make sure that schools are actually implementing guidance appropriately.
Yes, but also just a wee word on schools and recruitment. You know, there's a lack of fairness, really. You know, the way that our Northern Ireland schools operate, they're in competition with each other. Some schools are oversubscribed and they can do what they want, and they can, you know, not necessarily have to worry about being attractive to parents because they know they get the numbers in their doors. And then other schools are having to try harder to recruit. And there's a sense in which if you don't have a rule coming out of the department about what's expected of schools, then you're putting pressure on the leadership and the governance of that particular school to think, how do we best get kids who wanting to come to our school? If we go completely phone free and are very strict, will that keep kids away? Will the word go round in our community that that's the school where you can't have your phone, and then they don't get the numbers, and there's a competition then between schools in a local area? I think that that's really unfair. I think head teachers need our support. I think the rule needs to come from above, and head teachers are not left to make that decision and fight that battle, you know, in their own community.
Okay. Listen, thanks very much, folks. I really appreciate that, and thank you, Chair, for letting me in.
Thank you, Michelle. Just to Michelle's point there, which didn't quite get picked up, which was the ETI. So again, if the direction comes from the department, then would it be your view that it would flow naturally, that there is a clear expectation that is going to be covered by ETI in their inspection, that will be reported on, and that's not something that pitches school, that's a quality assurance mark that every school can expect on the cycle that will be looked at?
I think that's probably a question for the department's legal team in terms of whether the guidance at the moment is enough for it to be inspected against, and whether the safeguarding linked to that would embed that already in its existing form.
We can certainly write to the department and ask that question. So I think that's something.
If we look across the water to what Ofsted have done, after the Sarah Everard murder, Ofsted responded very quickly, and they put it in their inspection, framework that a school had to evidence how they were preventing girls from sexual violence. It had to be evidenced. And it very quickly became part of the expectation. And of course, schools responded very quickly by making sure that they were, planning curriculum, etc., to meet that. So I think, if we do decide that we want to protect our children in this way, then we can very quickly, manoeuvre the ETI to respond to that.
Certainly something we can discuss as a committee if that's something we can pick up directly with the department. John, you'd indicated next.
Yes, thank you. First of all, amazing stuff. Genuinely, the issue of smartphones is something very close to my heart, because I do think it's the single greatest issue facing young people, and indeed those who've grown up with smartphones, and those of us who are old enough to remember bricks and before. I think it has an impact on my brain, my concentration, my focus, relationships. So you've got me completely won over, so thank you. My first question is this. In the book The Anxious Generation, Jonathan Haidt made some key recommendations regarding young people and social media. Would you agree that some schools are at risk of replicating and reconstituting the problem through their heavy social media presence? There is a school presence.
Mr. Burrows, do you mean the school's own social media?
Yeah.
Look, I do think I have some concerns about that, particularly obviously with the use of children's faces, and ensuring, look, schools are doing that with consent, and they're carrying that out and doing it all, I'm sure, properly. But I do think that we should be questioning it, particularly with AI and what can be done. Again, I think that our schools are not necessarily in an easy position. We have a falling birth rate. They are they're trying to put out there how wonderful their provision is, and I understand why they would do that. But I do think it's something that it would benefit our children for the committee to evaluate. It's not something that would really fall under smartphone-free childhood, but it is something that a lot of parents in our community, myself included, we opt out of that. So my children's faces are not on any online social media, but sometimes that can be tricky as well.
Yeah. I mean, our priority is getting phones out of kids' hands. Social media is an absolutely valid way for adults to communicate with each other, and we don't have a position on that. But it's but it's not having them in the kids' hands.
Yeah. Okay. No, I get that. I do pick up the point about AI, and I'm horrified sometimes when I see on X people saying, "Hey, Grok, put this person in a bikini," and a member of the public, female, normally gets put in a bikini. It's awful. It's very invasive. But anyway, I'll move on. Question 2, again, Jonathan Haidt highlighted the growing influence of educational tech. Now, would you agree that can become a new form of distraction in the school? And I'm not anti-tech, but Sweden has went back to basic pen and paper, as many adults are. Is there something for pen and paper that we should be valuing?
Yeah, I definitely think we should be looking at the evidence around tech and its benefits. So if you look at the Lucy Crane report, she does talk about that digital use curve, and once an hour a week, up to an hour, there is benefit. The results are better, but actually once you go over, it may be an hour a day, but once you go over a certain amount of use, it's actually a negative effect on educational outcomes. So I think we should be asking that question. A lot of parents in our movement are asking that question. I also think, we should always follow the money and Steve Jobs wasn't giving his children iPads, and we seem to be very happy to be pushing our children in lots of settings in school and at home onto this kind of technology. So I think we should be really questioning how much we've bought into this, who is profiting from it, has it been tested, does it really benefit our children? And Charlotte, I'm sure, can speak to the teacher view on that and pen and paper.
There were some recent studies about how much more you learn when you're reading from a book rather than a screen. Do you know what I'm talking about? It was there's something about the way that we understand ideas that come better when we read them and reread them, and but also, so many parents at the minute are being asked to give their children this homework on screens. So, ed tech in school is one thing, but the expectation that our kids are doing their homework on screens or using tech of some kind is something that a lot of parents are very upset about, but also feel trapped. If a lot of parents just feel like they have to do what they're told. If the teacher sends home homework, then they have to make sure it gets done, and they don't feel empowered to stand up and say, my kid's not doing that online maths game. I'm the parent that did. I just said, yeah, they're not doing anything on screens. If you want them to do maths, then print something out, or I'll go and buy my own book, which in the end, I did. And actually recently my children's primary school has just said they're doing a full homework policy review, because there's more and more people who are raising questions about this, and teachers who are saying, is this really what we want? Do we really want them all going home and looking at screens? So I do think that, it's not about going backwards to paper and pen, but actually if you look at literacy rates in Northern Ireland are good. Our kids are good readers, right? But we could lose that. If you look across at England, which so much of the Department of Education is kind of focused on at the minute, it's not a good story to be following. We want to keep our high literacy rates in our primary school children, and that means keeping them reading books. We have better library facilities here than across the water. We have more reading happening here. And as I say, the Reading for Pleasure campaign this year is a reminder our kids need to be reading books.
Just conscious of time. John, just time for it would probably be for a comment rather than question, just in terms of time.
Sorry, I'm going to have to close the door because I've got dogs that I'm minding today. One wasn't well. I do apologise, everybody. I have a postman and I have 3 angry dogs. It's a final one, and I'm going to enter party politics now. I'm going to ask you an honest question, but I'm not going to mention parties, so you can not be partisan. Would you agree it's unfortunate some political parties have pandered to teenagers, and taken a populist view by opposing evidence-based reforms about access to phones in schools and tech, social media?
I want to say that I think this has been an issue that I have seen politicians united over at Stormont more than any other. So we have parents at 350 schools signed up to our pact, and we have had a number of politicians host events for us. We have people, we write to our MPs and our MLAs all the time. We meet councillors. I think that everyone actually thinks the same thing, and change is just not happening. Now, there may be some parties that haven't been engaged as fully. That's not really something I could comment on, but I would just say that every politician that I have engaged on, and that has been a lot, we have had very positive engagement.
Just in the interest of time, I will have to draw a line there, John.
Thank you. Can you just thank you? And I think you're doing wonderful work, and I agree entirely with the thrust of what you're saying, which I don't often say to witnesses. So thank you.
Thanks.
Danny, you're next.
Yep. Thank you, Chair, and thank you. I suppose my children do have smartphones, so I'm sort of like, I can see some benefits, but also I know the dangers and the pitfalls, and you have to watch out for it as a parent. I also volunteer in a youth club, and I'm very close to listening to what they say. Look, it's a big part of their lives, and so is social media. see, just going back to the educational use of it, and this is something that my child benefited from, was the Lexia program, and I thought it was really, really good, and that was done through smartphone or through the tablet or through an iPad. I seen benefits of that there, and so would you be advocating for completely taking away all type of programs and go back to pen and paper, or is there positivity from using technology in school?
I think, well, you know, Lucy Crane actually says that in her report she does think that children should be able to access this, and I think there are benefits. Look, we're really about trying to delay when children get smartphones, and whilst lots of us personally have strong views on EdTech and things like that, we're about delaying when we give our children smartphones and social media. So I have no doubt there are some things that are beneficial. I think that should be tested and evidence should be looked at. I also think, you know, there are often things where there's some benefits and a lot of negatives, and you have to make a decision on a risk-based approach. So I think it's about looking at the evidence, what actually is good, what's been tested, who's profiting from maybe what programme it is, questioning that and coming at it critically.
I have to say, I seen the benefits of it, regardless. There was an improvement to help him with a slight dyslexia that he has. So I was putting that to you there, and would it, when we talk about schools and phones and all that, it's okay saying we can shut it down between the hours of 9 and 3, but when it really fights bullying, it follows you to the bedroom, it follows you out of it. Look, you can't control that there, so an outright ban in school will not take away the phone out of the hand either. And then it's almost that social media is probably the biggest influence on our young people. Would you advocate for better RSE in our schools? Because we done an RSE inquiry, and that's what a lot of particularly our young men were saying. They were saying that we're not getting the right education in school, and then it is on the online forums of the likes of the Andrew Tates of the world who were influencing young men with that femicide and that culture and emojis and what they all meant, stuff that I never could envisage in my life until I watched that show Adolescence. It blew my mind and that there. So what would be your view on that?
Yeah, so I also do some teaching on challenging sexism in schools. I think, yes, we need excellent RSE in our schools. We need properly trained PSHE teachers who specifically want to teach that. Our system at the minute just gives a PE teacher, a geography teacher, somebody else, half an hour in the week to go and do something that they don't want to do. So that's a different committee discussion, but I'll happily come back to talk about that.
The point is, if you're going to balance it, like there's no point saying like having a political party or a politician who's very keen on banning mobile phones and that there, but won't deal with the actual supports that we shouldn't have RSE in school for talk's sake because of the scared of what it might teach, instead of empowering our young people.
I know.
Taking it away.
Well, I mean, I just think that having a smartphone in your hand is such an overwhelmingly addictive and powerful thing. As I said, could be used as a weapon in many ways.
So what age do you mean by that there? When you say that? Because I think
like under 16. So
under 16.
Well, I mean, in the Smartphone Free Childhood movement, we support each other to delay to 14, and then social media till 16. So it's about, yes, equipping our young people with really good education and really good self-esteem. It's self-esteem, it's love for yourself, it's respect for other people, it's knowing your role as a citizen, it's valuing each other. All of these things, make you, like a decent person, don't they? But if
better education, I'm just sorry I'm playing devil's advocate with you, but with better education, the positivity of technology should be there. Look, the one good thing about social media is it connects us. It can connect families across the world. I listen to my wee lad when he's on playing with his friends, because this is one thing that hasn't probably been touched on, is the screen time. My wee lad's biggest problem will be his PS5 rather than a smartphone. So what do you mean? And they can all talk amongst that and access YouTube through that. You can access social media through that there. Yeah. So it's where's the balance in it all?
And I think that's sometimes the challenge with our title, Smartphone Free Childhood. If you look at what we do recommend, it's like a shared computer and a shared family space, you know, so it's not no technology, but it's in an accountable way. I think some of these discussions will probably be more suited to the all-party group on parental participation, or maybe not parental participation, the one that Mrs. Guy is hosting, and there's a social media discussion on that in a couple of weeks that we've been invited to. I suppose the focus of today is how can we support our school leaders to keep smartphones out of schools, and that's what we would love your help with as well. And absolutely, there is a massive discussion to be had about social media and about what our children are accessing, and the pros and the cons. I think what is interesting is what Australia has done. If you think if there was something wrong in the playground and there was something that was going to cause children, some of them could die, most of them wouldn't, but some people could be really harmed, we would shut the playground, fix it, and then the children would get in. We wouldn't say just play in the playground while it's harmful and hopefully you won't be harmed.
Wider than
final
the school,
comment,
yeah,
Danny.
and the way of the school, and all. That's why I brought the PS5 into that connection. It's all there. Simply taking the smartphone out of the school, and there's plenty of that. That's only one wee small piece, because it wouldn't change.
Well,
society.
exactly, Danny. It is one part of a jigsaw of policies that we need to make our children's lives better. You know, I mean, kids are just not having the same amount of fun that they used to. Children are 70% less likely to go to a party than they were 20 years ago. Kids are not having the fun. They're stuck at home, on screens and phones.
Adults.
And so are adults, right? So, but my final point is this: culture shift is what we want.
Have to be final comment,
and culture shift comes from schools and rules. In the year 2000, when the smoking ban started, everybody was like, this is never going to work. People aren't going to stop smoking. I remember you'd come off the bus, your hair would stink of smoke. It was the norm. And you could not believe that it was going to change. And look at us now, 26 years later. Nobody can believe, my children can't believe, you used to sit and smoke in a restaurant. I mean, culture change happens, but it needs rules and it needs schools to get in there.
I will have to draw a line there, just in terms of time. Cara, you'd indicated next.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you so much to the panel. You can tell your real passion around this topic, and thank you for your advocacy on this. I know I am absolutely addicted to my phone, and I was laughing when John was speaking, because I think if my husband could, he would send me to a phone rehab, and that's with my frontal lobe fully developed. So I can't believe, I think it really will be the scandal of our time, and in 10 years' time we'll look back and wonder, how did we ever let under 18s have access to something that disrupts their sleep, gives them access to explicit content. And the wider issue as well, which you have touched on, is body image and body confidence, seeing these constant perfected images sort of over and over again. And we used to see schools as a safe space for our children, but now we're seeing predators can access them through phones, through the internet, around the clock. I have a number of questions, but in interest of time, I'll try and be as quick as possible. Do you think we're missing an opportunity to not address the use of phones in schools earlier in primary school? So really educating our young people at that really young age before they transition into secondary school to talk about someday you will have a phone, but the phone can't own you, so to speak. Do you think there's anything we should be looking at there through a primary school level?
Yes, look, I think education is so important in this, and planting those seeds, and there are lots of good organisations doing that kind of thing, and some in primary schools as well. So yes, absolutely, I think that's there is a need for that, and a place for that. Definitely education with both the children and also with their parents.
Absolutely. No, because I think attention span was one of the key things as well that you were really pointing out at us, and your ability to retain information. I know I feel like my brain has 100 tabs open at all times, and even when you're engaging in conversation, whether it's work or not, if your phone's on the table, you can't focus and you can't memorize. Do you think there's a role, I suppose, policy can play in really informing parents of when, it's not yet, now is not the time for your young person to have a phone? What more do you think we can do with regards to policy?
Well, I mean, that's why we want schools to lead that way, because if parents think that a child needs a smartphone to go into first year, We're hearing about some schools where it is pretty much expected that students will have a tablet. And they can buy one from the school through a purchase plan. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but I find that a bit shocking. And so if schools set out the expectations that you won't need a phone and you're not going to be left out without one, and we positively encourage you to live your life without a phone, then schools are sending that message. Parents look to schools for leadership, for guidance on what's healthy and what's safe and what's good for their children. So that's why we think schools have such an important part to play.
And yesterday, the Department of Education wrote to all school principals in Northern Ireland, telling them about the Parent Pact and smartphone-free childhood. So, that's the kind of thing, that's a good step. We probably need more things like that to sort of say, look, these are ways, methods that you can help parents who want to do something about this.
It's crazy to think, even when I was at school, the idea of using your phone in class is just completely foreign. And like what you just said there, Charlotte, about the need to have a tablet in schools, I wonder how that's impacting educational disadvantaged students who mightn't have the income and the pressure that's putting on the family to be able to afford one, as you say. So it's interesting, access to education is important here as well. Just lastly, do you think schools have the tools or the training to deal with harms that might originate online, but then, as you say, behaviourally or from a cyberbullying perspective, they end up, the outcome of that, it's in the school setting. How are teachers dealing with that? Is there any adequate training that you receive, or you've been teachers for some time? How have things changed over the years?
Well, I mean, teachers do get a lot of really brilliant training on safeguarding and responding to those kinds of needs. But I'm glad you raised the issue of disadvantage, because I think that this is a really core part of the discussion. Poor kids suffer harder with everything, don't they? That's the reality, right? And, it's going to be your children in disadvantaged areas that are much more at risk from any kind of predatory behaviour. And I had some stats, I've forgotten them now.
Yeah.
You have them?
So the Internet Matters 2019 report shows that a child that has care experienced is six times more likely than a child with no vulnerabilities to have someone online pressurise them into unwanted sexual activity. A child with ASD is 4 times more likely to see content about suicide.
And so, what I always say is that it takes a village to raise a child. We always say that, don't we? And if I'm the kind of parent that I'm really well organised and I've got my children's iPads all on the right controls and I'm sure that they're going to be fine, well, that's great. But most parents aren't like that. And actually, when you say that you're going to join a pact and delay the phone for your child, you're benefiting other kids too, because if we shift the culture where it's not normal for 11-year-olds and 12-year-olds to have a phone in their bedroom on their own with God knows who getting in contact with them, if we shift that culture, we're protecting the most vulnerable. So I think it's really about thinking about, who is most at risk with smartphones in their hands. And it is those children, and so we really need to protect them.
I think we've really normalised it, and it shouldn't be. But just lastly, in your teaching experience, the students who use smartphones in schools or have a smartphone versus the children who don't have access to a smartphone, can you see in your day-to-day life that those pupils without cope better, do better, and are more academic? Like, is that something you can see?
Oh yeah.
That's for a very, very
I have some stats. Kids do better in schools that are phone free, right? The results are better. It's widely reported. Kids, of course. I mean, so many books have been written about our attention spans and our ability to focus. We are doing our children no service when we give them distracting techniques. They need us to create safe, calm spaces for them to learn.
Agree wholeheartedly. Thank you both.
All right. David, you'd indicated next there.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation so far. I think certainly a lot of sympathy for what has been argued so far. I was at the Youth Assembly whenever they debated the phone pouches. It's fair to say that the majority of them did not like the idea of their phones being taken off them. And I think that has something to do with the fact that when you're young people, and when I was young myself, you project yourself probably as being more mature, more emotionally intelligent and so on than perhaps and developed than perhaps you are. And there is a time whenever it's for adults to take decisions to protect those young people. But some of the arguments that will be put up will be that, and you've touched on already, that there's a need for these in some ways. That I can think of ways that are fairly legitimate in terms of diabetes and apps and things that are used to help with the treatment of that and so on. Can we just clear that up probably from the off and say that there's exceptions
Of course,
in all cases and people aren't being
the guidance is really well drafted and allows those kinds of exceptions. Things like dyslexia were also mentioned earlier as well. If there is a child with a particular need, they need technology in their hands in school. There is a provision in it for that, for diabetes, for this kind of thing. Yeah.
Absolutely, and I agree as well. The arguments that have been put forward in terms of what our kids are seeing. Someone mentioned earlier the Charlie Kirk murder, and I was thinking I know someone from childhood who's seen when they were a child someone being murdered, being shot, and that had a tremendous effect on them. They had to go through counselling, all the rest of it. But there can't have been too many in the room who did not see Charlie Kirk's fairly graphic murder within hours of it having happened, if not less than that. And you don't have that sort of awareness or counselling or other things that people need to do. It's just taken as granted. And we did have that. I laughed when I was seeing 2005 in the document, because that's probably my time, and at that time people were being beheaded in the Middle East, and there was small clips that weren't as advanced as you are now, but they do go around schools, and you'll never completely prevent that. But I also agree with you that just because people will find ways around it is not a reason not to implement the rule, and that starts a culture change. But if I can play devil's advocate, having laid out my own view on that, I actually agree with Danny that the PS5s and so on, it really affects the development of interpersonal skills with young people. And I think we've seen that, we've heard that committee. But we're also preparing children for a modern world where it's going to be very technology focused, and we won't necessarily get a decision in that as just even our own country. That's going to be an international thing. We have Raspberry Pi being introduced to kids at a very young age, coding, all of that, which seems to send children on one line of thinking around this is going to be your future, you need to engage in technology and get it. That puts them well ahead of the curve in terms of their parents and so on. How do we then balance that in preparing them for the new economy, the new world, if you will, with protecting them in terms of, because I agree with actually wanting to limit social media. Be interested to see what comes out of Australia, but there is that tension, and I'm aware of that, and I'm very sympathetic with what you say, but I do understand that tension. And have you engaged with that at all?
Yeah, look, my son does coding. It's his favourite thing to do in the week. There's a difference between learning how to code with a teacher on a school computer than having access to the world, to pornography, to self-harm videos, to algorithms that are pointing you to things that are not helpful. So we're in no way anti-technology, and I think we should be looking at any evidence about it being used in school, but we're certainly not anti-technology or removing computers or anything like that. It's about trying to delay, when we give one of these to our children, that they have access to the internet 24/7 in their pocket, in their bedroom, everywhere. Yeah.
And you believe that can be done? I have to say, I think the more that I listen to, the more I think that the issue is much more around social media, but that actually, I do agree with limiting these things, certainly to 14, as you're saying, but it's such a wider issue. I think you recognise that. You talk about your own title, sort of focusing on that, but it's a much wider issue than that. But thank you for your presentation, appreciate it.
Thank you, David and Gary.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you both for your presentation. Very interesting indeed. You had mentioned Lisneal in my constituency, where they had sort of been ahead of the curve in terms of implementing the smartphone-free policy, and it seems to have worked extremely well and is very positive. It doesn't, however, seem to be, and I met with one of your colleagues fairly recently, and I'd sort of mentioned this as well. It doesn't seem to have been replicated, despite the close workings of various schools in that area. It doesn't seem to have been replicated across the board, and it's obviously low cost in terms of what they have brought about. Why then do you see that there's such a reluctance, even though these schools work together so well? Why then would they not replicate that if it's working so well for Lisneal?
Look, it's probably a question for the Foyle Community Learning team.
It is, yeah. But
what I would say is that different. Look, every school is different, and sometimes, and I sympathise with schools in terms of their budget concerns and about how they've started to use this ed tech since 2020, and they don't have the resources maybe to do it, and therefore if the children have phones, then that has been the natural way. So I don't know the case in Foyle in detail. Perhaps some have got very used to using that kind of technology. I don't know it.
Well, schools don't necessarily cooperate well just because they're in the same locality. And what I will say about, right, so if I decide as a head teacher that we're going to go phone free, there's a lot to change, right? It could be that the school day has to change, because when are they going to hand in the phones and when are they going to get them back? So I might restructure the timetable to have 10-minute registration in the morning. That's what they did in Lisneal, 10 minutes in the afternoon. In my school with the pouches, there was no need for that. They just have to go in the morning and they lock it, and then they go at the end of the day and unlock it. So, it is a decision for a school to do, and they'll do it if they're made to do it, if they have to do it. We all do what we have to do, don't we? And if the ETI is going to look at it when they come in, then we'll do it. Schools all over Northern Ireland right now are doing all sorts of stuff to satisfy ETI because they're expected to come in, right? So if that becomes part of an inspection framework, it will get done like that. So, but It's a process to go through. You have to get your teachers on board, you have to get your parents on board, get your kids on board, maybe alter the school day. There's a bit of work to it. Yeah. So a wee bit of a nudge will help people get that work done. And
I think the Minister's certainly going in the right direction in terms of the guidance and the policy that he wants to see. But is it fair to say, and I suppose it's to go to, I think it might have been Michelle who touched on sort of that wider health type guidance. Now, I wasn't on the committee at the time here, but I do recall reading it, and I have it in front of me in terms of the Professor O'Neill, mental health champion, was at the committee, and she had said, and I quote from her, that the evidence of 11-year-olds is that those who do not have a mobile phone have worse mental health. Having access to the internet every day is a positive thing. That was from Professor O'Neill. Now, she did obviously go on to say that excessive social media usage can have a negative effect. So what I'm saying is that clearly there is wide evidence out there, or certainly difference of opinions, and it's not about putting one against another by any means, because we all have our views and our evidence bases. But what would you say to that in terms of, if that is, mental health champion saying that,
Look, I would probably, I haven't spoken with her about it, and we welcome any discussion, but what I would look at is the Northern Ireland Registry for Self-Harm. So it's on page 40 of the slide deck that we sent to you. That is our trend in Northern Ireland at emergency departments for under 18 females coming to emergency departments having self-harmed. There's been an 84% increase in that in 9 years. And for suicide ideation presentations at emergency departments for under 18 females in Northern Ireland, that's gone up 324 for under 18, again, females. The corresponding figure for males is -1% for self-harm and 45% for suicide ideation. So, if we're saying, it's nothing to do with social media, and actually young people are anxious about other things in society, of which there are a lot of things to be anxious about, I would say, well, all of these other things are happening to boys and girls, COVID, the cost of living crisis, everything else. But there's something very unique happening which seems to be harming our girls. As Charlotte says, not every child is going to be impacted in the same way, but we need to take decisions as a society for the benefit of all in society, particularly the most vulnerable. So, the idea of maybe a little bit is okay. That's quite hard to moderate. My friends with children with phones, it's like this battle. They want more because it really draws you in. So, you know, there is a dose-response relationship. The more you have of it, the more likelihood you will show more mental health issues. But how do parents curtail that? It's very challenging, and that's why we promote delay, educate first, so that you're ready for it when you get it.
Can I just say that I think you just said there we can't pit evidence bases against each other. We absolutely can. That's what they're there for.
What I meant was I didn't want to put the mental health champion against yourselves in a sense that a confrontation. No, there's always going to be different.
Definitely an analysis of the numbers and the location and the context in which that research was drawn, because there's a wealth of evidence base that shows the harm being done to our young people's mental health. So if there's an outlier study with a few children with a different result, then we do need to look at that. But, you know, I think there's a mountain of evidence that suggests we have a mental health crisis on our hands, and it correlates with the time of the introduction of the smartphone.
Just in terms of a comment, you know, I'm fully on the side of those schools who have are smartphone free. Just for clarity, I can see the benefits, and certainly, you know, having a child of 8 years of age, I can't imagine even them using a smartphone. Certainly, we will do what we can to try and encourage
join the pact.
And join the pact, no doubt, absolutely.
That's great, thank you, Gary, and thank you both for your evidence. Sorry, did you want to come in, Kathy?
It's just a really practical question around the phone pouches, and I'm thinking to my own daughter's school, which they're not allowed their smartphone, but like she says, Mummy, it doesn't really matter because everybody's got an Apple Watch and they're able to message on it and things like that. Does the pouch, how does that work with an Apple Watch?
That's a good question.
Or any other watch?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I think some schools include Apple Watches in it, but other schools have, you know, less of a concern about the harm that can be done with an Apple Watch. I think there's some different bits of evidence about the watch, but I suppose the school, if they know that you've got an Apple Watch, need to get.
That's what she just says. Like, you can tell other ones are messaging each other because they've got their watches.
Because it's on their watch.
Yeah.
Which is practical.
A lot of schools' policies included nearly all as a catch-all. It's the phone, but it really means the watch as well when you read into it. So again, schools are just doing it all very differently. Yeah.
Okay, sorry, Chair.
No, that's grand, thank you. So thank you both for your evidence. I think there's probably some things we'll want to discuss as a committee in terms of some action. Certainly the ETI angle is one I would like to maybe take forward with the department in a wee bit more detail. But thank you both for your time.
Thank you all.
Thank you for your time.
We'll engage again in the future. Okay, so just while the witnesses are making their way out, is there anything in terms of actions that any members wanted to pick up? I would be keen to write to the department to really get a sense of what they are doing to monitor how schools comply with the current guidance. You know, if there's any data collected on that at all. I suspect we know the answer is that there won't be, and around any plans for ETI to actually formally be mandated to inspect schools on their compliance with that guidance and to look at their policies. So if members are agreed on that. Michelle, you'd indicated there.
Yeah, just a shameless plug again for the APG on online safety for children and young people. I think it was mentioned when I had to duck out. It is Tuesday the 27th, 1 to 2 p.m. I know some of the members of the committee are members of that APG, but I think it just underscores the session today just how useful that would be to encourage more discussions that are cross-party around this and try and formulate some sort of policy or some kind of actions around this that we can deliver locally. So shameless plug, but thank you, Chair, for letting me do that.
Oh, that's great. Plug made. That's all good. Any other actions, and are we agreed on right into the department as suggested?
Yeah,
agreed.
I wondered, did you want to write to the mental health champion as well, just to get the perspective on that point that Gary raised?
Yeah, and I just wanted to be clear, it wasn't about putting against, because everybody has, and I think that, you know, knowing Professor O'Neill and the expertise that she has as well in terms of her particular role, I think it's important to say. It just happened, I wasn't on the committee at the time, but it certainly would be useful again just to get their views on the record. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm certainly content with that if other members are agreed to.
We were putting it in, those presenting said that they'd welcome engagement with the school.
Yeah. And about the proposal, I mean, the witnesses were proposing that legislation would be the answer. So just for everybody's information, the private members development unit is closed for this mandate. But you might want to ask the department, is this something that's on their radar? I mean, they haven't communicated it to the Assembly at this
I think
point.
if we're writing again, no harm to add that again if members are agreed.
Sure.
Okay, that's great. So look, that moves us on to item 8. I'm going to propose we just move through the agenda. I think members have been in and out, so I think we'll forgo a comfort break and move on to item 8 on the agenda, and that is a discussion and it's had some discussion already in committee today. The inquiry into relationships and sexuality inquiry, and we did have a draft report that was circulated to members, so I'm going to propose that we take that item in closed session just so we can have a discussion in the round in relation to that draft report if members are agreed. Agreed. We just go into closed session. Okay, so just to confirm then, we had a discussion around just next steps in terms of finalising the RSE inquiry report, and it was agreed that members would provide feedback through the clerk over the course of the next week, so that by the close of play next week we should hopefully have feedback through from all the parties on that, and we had a very brief discussion on strategic planning in terms of priorities over the next number of weeks and months for the committee. The item 9 then on the agenda is correspondence. So,
can I just say as well that the committee was agreed to get legislative competence advice on the committee bill.
On the committee bill,
well.
yeah.
Thank you for
was
discussed just
keeping
now.
me right on that. Absolutely,
okay.
Yeah. That's grand. So item 9 is correspondence. So pages 166 to 243 in your packs, and there's also one item in table papers, and there's a summary note at page 166. And as usual, I'll just go through the items that need a committee decision or discussion. Otherwise, it'll be disposed of as per the note. So item 9.2, I just wanted to highlight, as it was one that came in before Christmas. It's a response from the EA on correspondence the committee had sent about savings measures. We'd seen it before Christmas, but we didn't have time in the meeting to discuss it. So look, I don't want it to labour it, but it is clearly a hugely challenging budgetary position, and I would want to suggest that we do go back and ask them for a full breakdown of what were the category 1, 2 and 3 costs that went through. So they've sort of broken those down into category 1, which the EA took forward themselves, category 2 where they needed departmental intervention of some sort to take forward savings, and category 3 those savings measures that they felt weren't acceptable. And I would want to suggest, as well as getting that clarity from the EA, to seek an update from the department on what is the status of those category 2 savings that are sitting with the department for a decision, to see what is actually happening with that. It was a full piece of correspondence, but it didn't really break down what the savings measures were. That would be my suggestion. Would members be in agreement that getting that level of detail would be helpful for committee?
Yeah, I think I asked that actually before Christmas, so it's just not, the reply hasn't
Is it
come
maybe
back
just
yet?
hasn't come back through yet? So if that's if that's in train, then we can leave that. That's grand. Okay, so then that takes us to item 9.3 and 9.5, and also 9.7. That's pages 172 to 190 and page 212. They're submissions to the SEN inquiry. Are we content to add those to the inquiry papers? Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Item 9.6, page 197. It's a memorandum of reply from the Department of Finance regarding the PAC report on managing the school's estate. So happy to get members' views on that. I know we are not blessed with a huge amount of capacity over the next while, but as and when it is possible, I would suggest this does feel, and I think Clark's possibly already sort of made some inquiries around this. It would be good to hear from the Audit Office to actually brief us on that report, as it would be our first opportunity to really get to grips with it, again in the current budgetary context and just in some of the discussions around that this week. I mean, the management of the school estate is absolutely critical on that. So again, if members are agreed. Agreed. Okay, item 9.8, page 218. It's correspondence from an individual regarding concerns about support for special educational needs for children who perhaps do not fit in mainstream learning support units or in a special school, and it's personal to the individual who sent it through. So it is upsetting correspondence really of a parent who's clearly really struggling to find an appropriate placement for their child. I'm happy to seek members' views on this. I would certainly suggest we would want to add that to our inquiry evidence, as I think it's a helpful parental perspective. Is there any other actions any members would want to propose, or are we content with that as the action? Is that agreed?
Yep.
Agreed. Item 9.9, page 220, it's a late submission to the committee's RSE inquiry. Are we content to add that to the inquiry papers? Agreed. Item 9.11, page 222, is a response from the department providing additional information following the finance briefing that we had towards the end of last year. It was an odd response from the department, I think, in some ways, and just referring us to AQs that had been submitted by other members rather than providing a full response. But in terms of the issue, and I know it had been raised by Michelle in the committee meeting, and it was something that I had been keen to get clarity on as well, was that sort of, I think we used the phrase discretionary spend of the department. They don't seem to like that phrase, but they broke down spending that wasn't effectively a statutory responsibility, to either school's budget or an arm's length body. But there were things in there that I was expecting to see, that budget lines for Transform Ed, budget lines for the curriculum review, and I'm just not really sure where those sit in that. So I wondered whether members would be content to go back and ask, could we get a full budget breakdown for Transform Ed? Because that remains unclear to me. And I mean, curriculum review may well sit within that, but I would suggest we would want to ask for a breakdown on the costs for the curriculum review as well. Is there anything else that members were hoping to see in that response that haven't, or are we content that Transform Ed and curriculum review are the main issues? Great. Okay. Item 9.12, page 236. It's a response from the Minister regarding the new guidance on transgender policies for schools. It indicates that a formal consultation process wasn't undertaken in the development of the policy, and that a children's rights impact assessment was not carried out, as they have no statutory requirement to do so. I think it's disappointing, given the potential impact of the policy, that a children's rights impact assessment wasn't carried out. I think, Deputy Chair, it was yourself had maybe raised it. I would maybe suggest we might want to share that, given their interest in children's rights, with the Children's Commissioner, and ask for their assessment as to whether that's an appropriate approach to policy making by the Department of Education. Do you have any other views? I know it was yourself that raised it, Deputy Chair.
Yeah, no, it is a disappointing response, and I agree that it should be shared with the Children's Commissioner and maybe the Children's Law Centre also.
A lot of members are agreed. Great. Item 9.14, page 239. It's a response from the Minister of Education regarding the Supreme Court ruling on the teaching of RE in schools, and it's effectively there is a review of the syllabus pending, and that the work is ongoing, and that, so it suggests we note that at this stage, if we're agreed. Item 9.15, page 241. Response from the Health Minister regarding the regulation of private tutors. So I would suggest we would want to share that with the original correspondent who'd highlighted the issue. Other than that, I would suggest we note, but pending a response from the safeguarding group, and they've undertaken to update us once they've discussed the issue, if we're agreed. Item 9.16, page 243. It's a response from the Department of Education providing a background briefing for the Education Pupil Reporting Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland 2025. Are members content that we return to the SL1 when the Examiner of Statutory Rules has reported, and we can decide how we want to proceed at that stage? Agreed. And then just in tabled papers, item 9.17, it's a follow-up on the Lost Boys report that's come through from the Evangelical Alliance. Other than noting the diary date on the 27th of January that they've put forward, I would propose we note, if we're agreed. Are members content to dispose of the correspondence as per the summary note, with the exceptions that we've discussed? Agreed. Okay, item 11 is the Forward Work Programme. It's page 247. Sorry, item 10 is Forward Work Programme, page 247. I think, given our closed session discussion on that, I don't think there's much to raise on that. I think we're all clear where we're at, unless anybody has anything they want to raise. Nope. So are we agreed to endorse the Forward Work Programme as drafted currently? Agreed. Item 11, any other business? Do we have any other business?
Yes, Chair.
Yes.
A couple of issues. First of all, a briefing on the workload review. We haven't received that yet. I wonder, would that be possible? And I'm just wondering if there's any update on the volume of responses to the consultation on the committee bill.
On the committee bill, so we have 27 responses today, isn't that right, Mark? Yeah, so there's, and the Youth Assembly are really interested, and they're coming along on the 28th of January to speak to the committee about that.
Okay, certainly on the workload review, I would be content to get an update on that if members are agreed. I think that's all, with the caveat with anything we're seeking briefings on that it'll be subject to pressures around any legislation coming through, but as the schedule permits, yeah, absolutely. Okay, so item 12 then on the agenda is date, time and place of next meeting, and that'll be Wednesday the 14th of January in room 29 and online. So it just leaves me to put the question that the committee meeting does now adjourn. Are we agreed?
Right.
Thank you.